Russell Vardell walked into that clinic like he owned the air inside it. He didn't knock, didn't announce himself. Three armed men fanned out behind him while he stood in the middle of the waiting room and looked at Claire Whitmore, the way people look at furniture, they're deciding whether to move or break. "Where is he?" Russell said. Not a question. Claire didn't answer right away. She was still holding a blood pressure cuff. Her hands were steady. That surprised even her. "There's no one here but patients," she said. Russell crossed the room in 4 steps and grabbed her by the collar of her scrubs, pulling her face close enough that she could smell the cigarette smoke on his jacket. "Wrong answer, sweetheart." And that was the moment Claire Whitmore's quiet, careful, completely ordinary life ended. If you've ever had someone look at you like you were nothing, like your whole existence was just a problem they needed to solve, then you already know what she felt standing there. The question isn't whether you'd be afraid. You would be. The question is what you'd do next. If this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Give this video a like if you want to see more, and drop a comment telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's get into it. The night it all started, Claire had been on her feet for 11 hours. That wasn't unusual. 11 hours was practically a short shift at the Ravenport Underground Medical Clinic, a cramped, underfunded facility tucked into the lower level of a converted warehouse on the east side of downtown. The place had no official name on the door, no insurance billing system, no waiting room with magazines or a television mounted to the wall. What it had was Claire, 2 part-time nurses named Delia and Santos, a physician's assistant who came in Tuesday and Thursday mornings, and a collection of medical equipment that ranged from barely adequate to genuinely worrying. It served people who had nowhere else to go. Undocumented workers, people who'd lost their insurance, addicts in recovery who needed wound care without judgment, elderly residents who couldn't afford the copay at the hospital across town. Claire had opened it 4 years earlier with a small inheritance from her grandmother and a stubbornness that her former hospital supervisor once described, not kindly, as pathological. She'd been asked more than once why she didn't just work somewhere that paid real money and had real equipment and didn't require her to order supplies through donation drives. Her answer was always the same: because nobody else is doing it. By 3 o'clock in the morning, Delia and Santos had both gone home. Claire was finishing a chart on a diabetic man she'd seen twice this week, making notes about his insulin levels and the fact that he'd walked 45 minutes each way to get there because he didn't own a car. She was tired in the particular way you get tired when exhaustion stops being a sensation and becomes just the baseline condition of your body. Her feet hurt. Her lower back was making its feelings known. She had a cup of coffee on the desk that had been hot 2 hours ago and was now something she kept meaning to throw away. She heard the sound before she understood what it was. Not a knock, not the buzzer she'd installed on the reinforced front door. A crash, heavy and sudden, like something structural had been struck with significant force. Then the door swung open. The man who came through it was big, and he was bleeding. Claire was on her feet before she'd consciously decided to stand. Her brain had already shifted registers, not because she was brave, but because she'd spent 12 years as a trauma nurse, and her body had been trained to move toward crisis rather than away from it. She crossed the room and caught the man before his knees gave out completely. He was heavy. Heavier than he looked, which was already substantial. Broad shoulders, a frame that suggested someone who'd stayed physically capable well into middle age. He was wearing an expensive suit, charcoal gray, and the left side of it was soaked through with blood. The smell hit her immediately. That iron copper smell that never quite left your memory once you'd learned it. "I need you to stay with me," Claire said, loud and direct. Not panicked. The man's eyes found hers. Dark eyes. The kind that, even half glazed with pain and blood loss, still carried something calculated behind them. He was assessing her even as he was bleeding on her floor. "How bad?" he said. His voice came out rougher than she suspected it usually did. The effort of speaking cost him something. "I don't know yet. I need you on the table." She got his arm over her shoulder and walked him the 6 feet to the exam table, and the fact that he cooperated, the fact that he let her, told her the pain was worse than his expression was admitting. She got his jacket off and the dress shirt beneath it, and that was when she saw it clearly. Entry wound, left side, below the rib cage. The bleeding was significant but not arterial, which was the first piece of information that kept her from completely catastrophizing. She had 2 units of blood that matched common types in the small refrigerator she kept for emergencies. She had suture materials and a surgical kit that was modest but functional. She had her hands and her training and 11 years of experience making do with whatever was in front of her. "What's your name?" she said, pulling on gloves. A pause, long enough that she looked up from the wound. "Vincent," he said. "Vincent. Okay. I'm Claire. I'm a trauma nurse and you're in my clinic and I'm going to do everything I can to keep you from bleeding out. What I need from you is to stay calm and do what I tell you. Can you do that?" Something shifted in his expression. She couldn't read it precisely. "Yeah," he said. She worked. She'd done harder things with worse equipment under worse conditions. Her first 2 years at Ravenport General's Trauma Bay had prepared her for situations that would have broken people with less experience. But working alone at 3 a.m. on a gunshot wound with no backup, and no attending physician, and no ability to call emergency services without answering questions she had no answers for, was its own specific kind of pressure. She kept her movements efficient. She kept talking to him, not constantly, but regularly, checking his alertness, watching his color, monitoring his breathing. He watched her back. She noticed that. Even as she was managing the wound, running the IV line, monitoring his blood pressure with equipment that was accurate within acceptable margins, he was watching her with that same calculating attention. Not threatening, evaluating. Around 4:30, after she'd gotten the worst of the bleeding controlled and had the wound properly packed and sutured, she stripped off her gloves and sat down on the stool beside the exam table and let herself breathe for a moment. "You're going to live," she said, "assuming nothing I can't see and hear is worse than what I can. You need imaging, ideally. An actual hospital would be no hospital." She looked at him. "I figured. I'm saying it for the record." Noted. He was still pale, but some of the gray had left his face. The pain was still there. She could see it in the set of his jaw, the way he was holding his body. But he'd decided not to show it more than necessary. "The bullet went through," Claire said. "You got lucky, relatively speaking. It didn't hit anything vital that I can find. But you lost a significant amount of blood, and you have tissue damage, and you are going to need to stay still for longer than you're going to want to." "How long?" "At least 3 days, minimum." He didn't argue. That surprised her. "You have someone I should contact?" she asked. "No." "Nobody?" "Nobody I want knowing I'm here." He paused. "Can you keep it that way?" Claire thought about that. She thought about this fact that a man with a gunshot wound in a city like Ravenport, wearing a suit that cost more than her monthly rent, who didn't want anyone to know where he was. She thought about what category that probably put him in. She wasn't naive. She'd worked the east side of Ravenport long enough to understand how things worked here. "I run a clinic for people who need help and don't have anywhere else to go," she said finally. "I don't ask questions about how people ended up needing help, and I don't tell anyone's business." He was quiet for a moment. "Thank you, Claire." The way he said her name was careful, like he was testing the weight of it. She got up and started cleaning up. He slept for most of the next 2 days. Claire stayed close, sleeping in 2- and 3-hour increments in the chair beside the door, checking his vitals every few hours, managing his pain with what she had. She wasn't a doctor, and she knew it. She also knew that moving him was riskier than keeping him here, and she knew that the options she was choosing between were imperfect on every side. On the second day, Delia came in for her shift and took one look at the situation and at Claire's face and said, quietly and without drama, "What do you need from me?" That was Delia. She didn't ask whose blood was on the floor or why there was a large unconscious man in the back room. She just asked what Claire needed. It was one of the things Claire loved most about her. "I need you to cover the front," Claire said, "and not mention him to anyone." Delia nodded once and went to make coffee. By the third day, Vincent was awake and coherent and deeply unhappy about being stationary. He kept asking about a phone. Claire had found one on him and powered it off the first night because she wasn't certain about things she had no way of being certain about, and because her instincts had been trained to preserve options. She gave it back on day 2 because he was going to recover, and she wasn't running a prison. He made calls in short, low conversations she made no attempt to overhear. She went about her work. The clinic was open during the day, and she had other patients, a construction worker with an infected foot wound, a teenager with a sprained wrist, An older woman managing her blood pressure who mainly seemed to want someone to talk to. Claire saw all of them. She checked on Vincent between patients. On the afternoon of the third day, she brought him a cup of coffee, and he looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him yet. "You know who I am," he said. It wasn't a question. She sat down on the stool. "I know what you probably are. I don't know specifically who you are." Vincent Carroway. She didn't react visibly. She'd had time to suspect the category. The specific name landed differently than she would have predicted. Not with fear exactly, but with something heavier. The Carroways weren't a rumor in Ravenport. They were embedded in its infrastructure, the shipping terminals, the construction unions, the way certain building contracts got awarded and certain inspections got overlooked. She'd treated people over the years whose situations connected to that world in ways nobody said out loud. "Okay," she said. He looked at her steadily. "That's all? What would you like me to say?" Most people have a more significant reaction. "I'm not most people," Claire said, "and you're my patient. That's what you are until I discharge you." Something crossed his face that she still couldn't fully read. It wasn't quite a smile. It was closer to the expression someone makes when they encounter something they didn't expect to encounter and aren't sure yet what to do with it. "I can arrange payment. We don't turn people away based on money," she said. "And we don't charge people based on who they are. That's not how this clinic works." He was quiet for a moment. "You built this place yourself," he said. It wasn't quite a question. "With some help, but yes." "Why this neighborhood?" "Because people here need it, and nobody else was going to do it." He looked at her for a long moment with that evaluating attention she'd noticed from the first night. Then he picked up his coffee cup and looked at it rather than at her. "I'm not going to pretend to be something I'm not," he said. "I'm not asking you to. What I do, how I've lived, I'm not going to apologize for it to a stranger." "I didn't ask for an apology either," Claire said. "I asked you to stay in bed and not tear your sutures." He looked at her again with that almost not quite a smile. "You're difficult," he said. "I've been told." He was quiet for a while after that, and Claire went back to her charts, and the afternoon went by in the ordinary rhythm of a clinic day, and she almost believed the worst was over. She was wrong. The sound came at 6:47 p.m., while Delia was still there and the last patient of the day had just left. Not the crash of the first night. This was different. This was the sound of multiple vehicles pulling up outside, and then feet on pavement, and then voices she couldn't make out. Delia appeared in the doorway of the back room. Her face was careful. "There are men outside." Claire looked at Vincent. I was already trying to sit up, and she put a hand on his chest without thinking. "Stay," she said. "Claire, you are not healed enough to deal with whatever that is. Stay." She walked out to the front. There were 3 of them in the waiting room. They'd come through the unlocked daytime door, which she'd forgotten to bolt after the last patient. All 3 were in dark clothing. All 3 were large in the specific way that people who are paid to be large tend to be. And the one at the front was not someone Claire had seen before, but was someone she immediately understood. He was in his mid-40s. Expensive clothes, not quite as expensive as Vincent's, worn with the ease of someone who'd had money long enough that it no longer needed to announce itself loudly. Dark hair going silver at the temples. A face that was handsome in the way that certain kinds of dangerous things are handsome. Structured and careful, with very little warmth behind the eyes. He looked at Claire the way Russell Vardell always looked at things he was deciding whether he needed. "I'm looking for someone," he said. "This is a medical clinic," Claire said. "If you need treatment, I can help you. If you don't, the door you came through is right behind you." He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "I think you've had a recent patient who I'd very much like to speak with. Patient information is confidential. That's a very admirable policy." He took one step toward her. "But I think we both know you're not a real hospital, sweetheart, which means you don't have real protections, which means that policy is worth whatever I decide it's worth." Delia had appeared behind Claire quietly, and Claire felt her presence there without turning. She was grateful for it and terrified by it simultaneously. "There's nobody here but staff and patients," Claire said. Her voice came out level. She was working to keep it that way. "I'm going to ask you to leave, and I'm going to decline." He took another step, and that was when he reached out and grabbed the front of her scrubs. Not hard enough to hurt yet, but hard enough to make his intentions about force absolutely clear, and pulled her close. "Let's try this again," Russell Vardell said quietly. "Where is he, Bum?" And that was the moment the recovery room door opened. Claire heard it before she saw it. The soft click of the handle. Then footsteps, slow and deliberate but present, and she turned her head just enough to see Vincent Carroway standing in the doorway to the back room. He was pale. His hand was on the doorframe in a way that looked casual and was clearly supporting more weight than it appeared to. He was wearing the dark pants from his ruined suit and a clinic t-shirt that was too small for his frame, and he looked like he had absolutely no business being on his feet. He looked at Russell. Russell looked at him. Something passed between them, something old and complicated and violent, the kind of communication that happens between people who have known each other long enough to have accumulated a history that required no words. Then Russell smiled, and it was a worse smile than the one before. "Vincent," he said. He let go of Claire. "You look terrible." "You should see the other guy," Vincent said. His voice was steady. Whatever the effort of standing was costing him, he was paying it without letting it show. He looked at Claire briefly, and his expression said something she wasn't sure she could translate, and then he looked back at Russell. "She's nobody," Russell said. His voice had shifted into something almost gentle. "She's a civilian. She doesn't factor in. The problem we have right now is between you and me, Vincent. There's no reason to complicate it with—" "Her name is Claire Whitmore," Vincent said. "I don't care what her name is." "That's unfortunate, because I care significantly." A pause. "Because she's my wife." The room went completely still. Claire stopped breathing. Russell's face did something complicated, something that moved through surprise and calculation and skepticism in fast sequence. He looked at Claire, then at Vincent, then back at Claire again, studying her the way you study something when you're trying to find the seam in a fabrication. "Your wife," Russell repeated. "My wife," Vincent said. His tone was absolutely flat, not aggressive, not emotional. The tone of someone stating a fact about the weather. "Since when do you have a wife?" "Since before you needed to know about it." Russell looked at Claire one more time. She was standing completely still, her brain processing about 3 different responses to what had just happened, none of them particularly useful. She understood what Vincent was doing. She understood why. She also understood that she'd had absolutely no part in agreeing to it. "This is—" Russell started. "Russell." Vincent's voice didn't rise. It sharpened. "You came into my wife's clinic. You put your hands on her. I want you to think very carefully about the conversation you want to have next." A silence. Russell looked at the 2 men behind him, then back at Vincent. Then he smiled again, and this time there was something cold and patient in it that was more frightening than anything else he'd done so far. "Of course," he said. "My apologies. Clearly I've misunderstood the situation." He straightened his jacket. "We'll speak soon, Vincent." He left. His men followed. The door closed behind them. Delia let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for the last 5 minutes. Claire turned to look at Vincent. He was still holding the doorframe. Whatever the performance had cost him physically, it was presenting its invoice now. She could see it in the set of his jaw, the controlled way he was breathing. "Get back in bed, Ed," she said. "Claire, I have about 14 things to say to you," she said, "and I will say all of them. But first you're going to get back in bed before you tear everything I spent 2 nights putting back together. Move." He moved. She got him back on the exam table and checked his sutures and his vitals, and everything looked intact, which was more than she would have given even odds on, and then she sat down on the stool and looked at him for a long moment. "Your wife," she said. It was the fastest option. "You told a man who came here with armed people that I am your wife, without asking me, without warning me. He was about to hurt you. He already had his hand on me," she paused, "which I was handling." "I know. I don't need—" "I know," Vincent said again. Something in his voice shifted. "I know you were handling it. I'm not saying you weren't. I'm saying it was going to get worse, and I needed to stop it, and that was the fastest way to stop it." She looked at him. He looked back at her, steady and unrepentant. "That man," she said carefully, "Russell, is he the reason you came through my door looking like that?" A long pause. "Yes." "He shot you." "He arranged for it." Claire absorbed that. She looked at her hands for a moment. The hands that had spent 2 nights keeping this man alive, and she thought about what it meant that the person who'd tried to kill him had now been inside her clinic, had put his hands on her, had looked at her like a problem with a disposal solution. "The wife story," she said. "How long does that buy you?" "Long enough for me to deal with him." "And then it goes away?" Vincent met her eyes. "Then you get your life back," he said. "You have my word." Claire looked at him for another moment. Then she stood up and started gathering her cleaning supplies because the front room still needed to be sanitized, and she needed something to do with her hands, while she processed the fact that her life had just changed in ways she didn't yet have full visibility on. "Your word," she said, mostly to herself. "Right." But she didn't throw him out. She didn't call anyone. She went and cleaned her front room, and Vincent Carroway rested in her back room. And outside on the street, the night went on the way Ravenport nights always went, complicated and closed and full of things that were better not examined too directly. And the Carroway family ring, which she didn't know about yet, sat in Vincent's jacket pocket and waited. The ring stayed in his jacket pocket for 2 more days. Claire didn't know about it. She was too busy managing the fact that her clinic was now operating under circumstances she hadn't agreed to and couldn't fully calculate the risk of, while simultaneously keeping her most complicated patient from doing anything that would undo the repair work she'd put into him. Vincent was a bad patient in the specific way that capable men with control issues tend to be bad patients. He didn't complain. He didn't ask for things unnecessarily. What he did was push the boundaries of what she'd told him he could do in small, incremental ways that required her to notice and push back each time. On the morning of the 4th day, she caught him standing at the small window at the back of the room, fully upright, looking out at the alley with his phone pressed to his ear. She stood in the doorway and waited. He finished the call, turned, registered her expression. "I was standing," he said, "not running." "You were standing on a wound that I told you to keep pressure off of. I've had worse." "I don't doubt that," Claire said. "Sit down anyway." He sat. Not quickly, not with the reflexive compliance of someone accustomed to following instructions, but with the measured cooperation of someone who had decided, in this specific context, that the person giving the orders had earned them. It was a distinction she'd started to notice. Vincent Carroway didn't do anything without deciding to do it. Even cooperation was a choice he made consciously. "How many calls have you made this morning?" she said. "Several." "To people who know where you are?" "To people I trust with that information." "How many people is that?" He considered. 3. She looked at him for a moment. Russell had 3 men with him when he came here. Something moved behind his eyes. "Those aren't the same 3. "You're sure?" "Yes." She wasn't entirely sure she believed him, and she wasn't entirely sure she didn't. That was the particular difficulty of Vincent Carroway. He didn't lie in the obvious ways, which made it harder to identify the less obvious ones. "My offer stands," he said. "I can move you somewhere safer, somewhere Russell won't. This is my clinic, Claire." "This is my clinic," she said again. "I'm not leaving it because someone decided to use it as a location in whatever this is." She paused. "And for the record, the next time you plan to tell someone I'm your wife, I would appreciate 30 seconds of warning first." He had the grace not to smile at that. "It was the fastest option," he said again. "You said that already." "It's still true." She picked up his chart and reviewed what she already knew by memory, mostly to have something to look at other than him. His vitals were stable. The wound was healing faster than she'd expected, which she attributed partly to his physical condition and partly to something in his baseline constitution that seemed to approach damage the way certain machinery approached stress, not breaking, just absorbing. "Russell is going to investigate," she said. "Yes. When he figures out we're not actually married, he won't figure it out before I deal with him." She looked up from the chart. "And how long does that take?" "As long as it takes." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not." She set the chart down. She'd had a version of this conversation twice already, each time arriving at the same place, Vincent providing exactly enough information to answer the immediate question while giving her no real visibility on the larger picture. She'd worked with patients in crisis before, patients who were hiding things, patients who were frightened enough to manage information carefully, and she knew the signs. Vincent wasn't frightened. He was strategic. It was a different thing. "I need to know if my staff is in danger," she said directly. Not abstractly, specifically. Delia comes in at 7. Santos comes in at noon. If being here puts them at risk, I need to tell them to stay away. Vincent was quiet for a moment. She watched him actually think about it. Not perform thinking, but do it. For the next 48 hours, he said carefully, having fewer people here is safer. Claire nodded once. She picked up her phone and texted Delia. Take the next 2 days. Paid. No questions right now, I'll explain later. She sent the same to Santos. Then she put the phone in her pocket and looked at Vincent. Okay, she said, then it's just us. He looked at her with an expression she was starting to be able to read slightly better than at the beginning. It was something between assessment and something that might, in a different man, have been called appreciation. You're not what I expected, he said. What did you expect? I'm not sure. More panic, possibly. Panic doesn't suture wounds, Claire said, and it doesn't make decisions. I've been in emergency medicine for 12 years. Panic is a luxury I stopped being able to afford around year 2. She went to make coffee because the conversation was becoming something she wasn't entirely sure how to manage, and coffee gave her a task. Behind her, she heard Vincent shift on the exam table and the quiet exhale that told her the movement had cost him. Stay still, she said, without turning around. I didn't move. You were about to. A pause. How do you know that? I've been watching you for 4 days. He didn't answer that. She heard him settle. The coffee maker was old and loud and took 4 minutes that neither of them filled with words. When she brought him a cup, he took it with both hands, the way people do when they want something warm to hold more than they want something warm to drink. Tell me about Russell, she said. He looked at her over the cup. Not the details, she said. Not whatever you're not going to tell me anyway. I mean, who was he to you? Before. A long pause. My father trusted him, Vincent said finally. When my father died, Russell was the one who helped me hold the organization together. He knew things I didn't know yet. He filled gaps. He paused. I trusted him. And apparently he decided that helping me was a temporary arrangement while he built something better. Claire watched his face. There was no theater in it, no performed anger or performed betrayal. What was there was something quieter, and therefore worse. The specific flatness of someone who had already processed the emotional content of a betrayal and arrived on the other side of it into something colder. How long ago did you find out? She said. I found out when someone shot me, Vincent said. I suspected before that. How long before? He looked at his coffee. Long enough that I should have moved faster. That was probably the most honest thing he'd said to her. She recognized it as such. She was about to say something, she wasn't sure what, something probably inadequate to the situation, when her phone buzzed. She looked at it. Unknown number. She showed it to Vincent without saying anything. His face changed. Not dramatically. A small tightening around the eyes, a shift in how he was holding his jaw. Don't answer it, he said. She didn't. It rang 4 times and stopped. Then a text came through from the same number. Tell your patient I have a message for him. Tell him the meeting is set. Waterfront, Thursday, 9 p.m. Tell him to come alone or the conversation changes. She read it twice, handed the phone to Vincent. He read it. His expression stayed flat, but she watched his right hand close more firmly around the coffee cup. Thursday, she said. That's tomorrow. Yes. He's going to use your answer to figure out where you are. He already knows where I am, Vincent said. He knew when he walked in here. He's known since that night. The understanding of that moved through her slowly and then all at once. He'd known. Russell had come here not to find Vincent but to send a message, to demonstrate that he could get to Vincent anywhere, even in a place like this. The clinic had never been a hiding spot. It had been a statement about reach. Then why, she started. Because he can't move against me directly yet. He needs to be certain about the organizational support before he does. Vincent set the phone down on the exam table beside him. The meeting tomorrow is either a negotiation or a setup. Which do you think? I think Russell stopped wanting to negotiate when he decided to arrange my death, Vincent said. I think it's a setup. I think the question is whether I go anyway and use that to my advantage. You can't go, Claire said flatly. You're 3 days out of a significant wound repair. You have restricted mobility, you're not at full physical capacity, and you're, I know what I am. Then act like it. He looked at her. She looked back. It was, she thought, probably the third or fourth version of this particular exchange they'd had in different forms since he'd woken up and started making decisions that her medical judgment categorically disagreed with. "I have people who can go in my place," he said. "I'll have information by tomorrow morning. And if the information says it's a trap, then I'll know where he wants to spring it. And that helps you how, specifically? Because if I know where he wants to move," Vincent said, "I know where he isn't." She stared at him for a moment. The logic of it was actually sound, which was annoying. She picked up her coffee and finished it and didn't say anything else about Thursday. What she said instead was, "I'm going to need more medical supplies. If you're going to be here another few days, I'm running low on what I used on you. Make a list. I'll have someone bring what you need." She made the list. She gave it to him. He made a call, short, low, the way all his calls were. And she went about the business of keeping a clinic running with no staff and a patient who was becoming the organizing center of her entire professional situation. The supplies arrived 3 hours later. A man she'd never seen brought them in 2 large boxes, set them inside the door without coming further into the clinic, and left. The supplies were good, better than what she usually ordered. Some of it was equipment she'd had on her wish list for 2 years and never been able to fund. She stood in the middle of her clinic looking at those boxes and feeling something she didn't have a clean word for. Vincent appeared in the doorway to this back room, one hand on the frame. He was better at standing now, still careful, but better. "Too much?" he said. "It's what I asked for." "There might be a few things you didn't ask for." She looked in the second box. Better quality monitoring equipment, a portable ultrasound unit, modest but functional, and something she'd been trying to source for 18 months. She stood looking at it for a moment. "I don't want your money," she said. "It's supplies for a medical clinic. It's not my money, it's inventory." "That's a technical distinction." "I specialize in technical distinctions," Vincent said. She closed the box. "Thank you," she said, because she was capable of being practical even when she was also being principled. Then she carried the boxes to the storage room and put everything away, and didn't let herself think too much about the portable ultrasound. Thursday arrived the way bad days tend to, not with dramatic announcement, but with the ordinary texture of a morning that felt slightly off from the first moment of it. Claire was up at 5:30, which was normal. The light through the clinic's small windows was gray, which was also normal for that time of year in Ravenport. What wasn't normal was the tension she could feel in the building, the way you feel pressure changes before weather. Vincent was on the phone by 6. 3 calls, each brief, each lower than the previous. He ate the breakfast she brought him without looking at it, which told her he was thinking harder than he was eating. By 9, she knew something had shifted. He came out of the back room, slowly but upright, and sat down in one of the waiting room chairs and looked at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not flat, not calculated. Something that was almost, but not quite, troubled. "Russell called an emergency meeting of my captains," he said. Claire looked up from what she was doing. "When?" "Tonight. He's claiming I'm incapacitated and that leadership needs to be transferred." She absorbed that. "Can he do that?" "He can call the meeting. Whether it accomplishes what he wants depends on how the captains respond." Vincent's jaw moved. He's been building toward this. He's been working the captains individually. I can see the shape of it now. He's been telling them I'm not stable, that I'm making decisions that put the organization at risk. Is he right? The question came out before she fully decided to ask it. She watched something flash in his expression. Not anger, but a kind of sharp attention. "About what specifically?" he said carefully. "About the decisions." He was quiet for a moment. "Some of the decisions he's pointing to were mine," he said. "Some of them were his, that he's reframing as mine. That's the problem with someone who's been inside your operation for 15 years. He can rewrite history because he was there for all of it." Claire nodded slowly. "So you need to be at the meeting?" "Yes." "Which means you need to be upright and functional in..." She looked at her watch. 9 hours. 8.5. She looked at him steadily. "That's aggressive." "Yes." "Your wound..." "Will hold," he said. "I'll manage it." "You'll manage it," she repeated. "Like you managed standing at the window yesterday for 30 minutes. "I didn't tear anything." "You got lucky." "I usually do," he said, and there was something in how he said it that wasn't bravado. It was something closer to the kind of fact-based assessment you make when you've survived things that suggested survival wasn't guaranteed, and you've drawn whatever conclusions that evidence provides. She stood up and crossed to him and looked at his eyes, checking them the way she always did, looking at the alertness in them, the focus. "You're going to need to look healthy," she said. "I'm aware. Not just upright, healthy, controlled. Because if they see any weakness, I know how this works, Claire." "I know you know how it works," she said. "I'm telling you the medical reality of what we're working with. You have a wound that's healing well but is still healing. You have tissue damage. You have a pain level that you are managing through what looks like pure stubbornness, and that kind of management has a time limit." She paused. "I can help you look better than you feel. That's within what I can do. But I need to know you understand the cost." He looked at her for a moment, really looked at her. "What's the cost?" he said. "If you push tonight and something goes wrong physically, we're in a significantly worse position than we are right now." She held his gaze. "If you tear that wound under pressure, if you're in a room full of people who are watching for weakness, that's not just a medical problem, is it?" A pause. "No." "Then we do this carefully." He nodded once. It was the most unambiguous cooperation she'd gotten from him. She spent the next 2 hours doing what she could, adjusting his dressings, assessing his mobility, helping him identify which movements he could make without visibly compensating and which ones he needed to avoid. It was strange work. She'd done discharge prep before, but never anything quite like this. Preparing someone not to go home but to walk into a room where his authority was under active assault and his body was working against him. Vincent was a good subject for it, actually. He was precise about what he could and couldn't do. He didn't exaggerate his capacity in either direction. When she asked him to demonstrate a movement and it caused pain, he said so rather than hiding it, which she appreciated more than she'd expected to. Around noon, she found herself sitting across from him while he reviewed something on his phone, and she realized she'd stopped thinking of him in the same category she'd placed him in at the beginning. That wasn't comfortable to acknowledge, but it was true. "You need a suit," she said. He looked up. "You came in wearing one that's been cut apart and is currently in a biohazard bag. You can't go to a meeting of your senior people in a clinic t-shirt. I've arranged for someone to bring clothes." "Okay." She paused. "And someone who can drive you." "Also arranged." "And someone who can—" "Claire." His voice was quiet. "I've been running an organization for 15 years. I know how to prepare for a meeting." "You've been running an organization for 15 years while not recovering from a gunshot wound," she said. "The preparation this time has additional variables." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Would you come?" The question landed quietly and stayed there. "To the meeting," she said. "As what you are," he said. "As what Russell has told them you are. My wife." A pause. "It would change the dynamic. He's expecting me to come damaged and alone. Coming with you changes what he's planned for," she said slowly. "Yes." She looked at her hands for a moment. She thought about Russell's hand on the front of her scrubs, the way he'd said sweetheart, the way he'd looked at her clinic like it was a location on a map rather than a place where people came because they had nowhere else to go. "If I do this," she said carefully, "I want something from you." He waited. "My staff, Delia and Santos. Whatever happens after tonight, whatever this becomes, they're not part of it. They're protected, not by your people standing over them, but by Russell and anyone connected to him having no reason to look at them." "Agreed." "And this clinic," she met his eyes, "this building, if anything happens to it, nothing will happen to it. If it does," she said, "I want your word that it gets rebuilt, exactly what it is. Not improved, not relocated, rebuilt." He looked at her steadily. "You have my word." She nodded once, then she stood up. "Tell me what I need to know about these people," she said. "If I'm walking into that room, I need to know who's who." He told her. She listened. She was good at listening. She'd trained herself into it over years of intake interviews, of hearing what patients said and what they left out and what the gap between those things meant. Vincent was a precise briefer. He didn't editorialize. He gave her the facts and the relationships and the organizational structure in clean, functional language. By the time the car arrived, black, unmarked, driven by a man she'd never seen who clearly knew Vincent well enough to not require introduction. Claire had changed out of her scrubs into the one set of decent clothes she kept at the clinic for the occasional administrative meeting. Dark slacks, a charcoal blouse. Not formal. Functional. Vincent was wearing a suit someone had brought. Charcoal, well-fitted, expensive. He moved carefully inside it. She could see him calibrating every step, every gesture, managing the pain into a performance of normalcy that was, she had to admit, impressive. He paused by the door and looked at her. "One more thing," he said. He reached into the jacket pocket of his new suit and brought out a ring. Antique gold, simple and heavy-looking, with something engraved inside the band she couldn't read from the distance. "The Carroway family ring," he said. "It belonged to my mother. Russell will know it." He held it out. She looked at it for a moment. She picked it up and put it on her left ring finger without saying anything. It was slightly large. She adjusted it so it wouldn't slide. "Fits well enough," she said. "It does," Vincent agreed. They went to the car. The meeting was held in the private dining room of a restaurant in Ravenport's North Quarter that had been in the same family for 40 years and served exclusively as a neutral location for conversations that required privacy and a certain level of implied formality. Claire registered all of this in the 2 minutes between when the car stopped and when they walked through the door. The neighborhood, the cars outside, the men posted at the entrance who were not posted there to welcome customers. She kept her pace matched to Vincent's, slow enough that it read as deliberate rather than impaired. She didn't take his arm because that would have looked like support, and support was not the appearance they needed. She walked beside him as someone who belonged there. The room held 9 men besides Russell. She filed faces and read body language and assessed the room the way she'd learned to assess waiting rooms. Who was tense, who was performing calm, who was watching the door, who was watching Vincent. Most of them were watching Vincent. Russell stood at the head of the long table. He looked at Vincent with an expression that was structured around what appeared to be professional concern and was actually something Claire recognized from her clinic, the expression of someone who'd expected a patient to be in worse shape than they were and was recalculating. Then his eyes moved to her, and the recalculation became something more complex. "Vincent," Russell said, "I'm glad you're well." His voice was warm and carefully calibrated. "And this must be—" "Claire," Vincent said, "my wife." A beat of silence. "Of course," Russell said. He looked at her directly, and the warmth in his voice didn't reach the part of him that was actually thinking. "It's wonderful to finally meet you, Claire. Vincent has been very private about his personal life." "He has," Claire agreed pleasantly. She sat down because standing required more management, and she wanted to look settled. Russell sat. The rest of the room followed. He began. He was good at it. Claire had to give him that. He framed everything carefully, used language that sounded like concern while delivering accusations, referenced events in ways that were accurate enough to be plausible and shaped enough to be devastating. He painted Vincent as a man whose judgment had been compromised, whose decisions had cost the organization, whose recent absence and injury were symptoms of a larger instability. Nobody interrupted. Several people shifted in their chairs. And then Russell looked at Claire and his voice changed into something almost gentle. "I mean, no disrespect," he said, "but I think it's fair to ask what a woman who's been, forgive me, a nurse in a community clinic, what she could possibly understand about the weight of the decisions we're discussing here." The table waited. Claire felt the room's attention settle on her like weight. She felt Vincent beside her, completely still, not intervening, not defending, waiting. She thought about the last 4 days. She thought about 2 nights of working alone in the dark to keep this man alive. She thought about Russell's hand on her scrubs. She thought about her clinic, and Delia, and Santos, and the diabetic man who walked 45 minutes each way. She set her hands flat on the table and looked at Russell Vardell directly. 3 nights ago, she said, your boss came through my door bleeding badly enough that he had 2, maybe 3 hours if nobody intervened. She kept her voice even, conversational. His own people weren't there. His own people didn't find him. I was there. Alone. With what I had. She let a half-second pass. I kept him alive. I did that. She looked around the table slowly. I know what I did for Vincent. She brought her eyes back to Russell. What exactly did you do for him? The silence in the room was a different kind of silence than the one before. Russell's face didn't change. He was too practiced for that. But something behind his eyes shifted into a cold attention that Claire recognized as the look of someone who'd just reclassified her from irrelevant to dangerous. Several of the men at the table were looking at each other. Vincent said nothing. He didn't need to. Russell smiled. It was his worst smile yet. "Well," he said quietly, "that's very impressive." He looked at Vincent. "She's quite something, your wife." "I know," Vincent said. The meeting continued. It was another 40 minutes of careful, controlled exchange that Claire followed and partly understood and partly took on instinct. And by the end of it, Russell had not accomplished what he'd intended to accomplish, and the room had not given him the authorization he'd come for. But as they were leaving, as they walked through the restaurant and out to the car, and as Claire was processing what had happened and what it meant, she saw Russell standing near the door watching them go. He wasn't angry. That would have been better. He was patient. She got into the car, and the door closed, and Vincent sat beside her in the dark of the back seat, and she could feel the cost of the last 2 hours on him. The controlled breathing, the careful stillness. And she didn't say anything about it because she understood he needed the moment to not be observed. The car moved through Ravenport's streets. She watched the city go by. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number again. One text. She read it again. She showed it to Vincent without saying anything. He read it. His jaw hardened. The text said, "Nice performance. Enjoy the clinic while you can." And at that moment, 2 miles away, the Ravenport Underground Medical Clinic, 4 years of Claire Whitmore's life, everything she'd built from her grandmother's inheritance and a pathological refusal to give up, was already burning. The car stopped 2 blocks from where the clinic used to be. Claire was out of the door before the vehicle fully stopped moving. Vincent said her name, one word, sharp, and she heard it and kept walking anyway because her body had already made the decision her brain was still catching up to. She could smell it before she could see it. That specific combination of burning insulation and melted plastic and something underneath that was worse. The smell of a place that had been a place and was becoming something else. She'd smelled it before in her life, twice, both times at accident scenes where vehicles had caught fire. And her nervous system remembered it in ways her conscious mind didn't have full control over. She came around the corner and stopped. The clinic's front was gone. Not damaged. Gone. The reinforced doors she'd been so deliberate about installing, the windows she'd replaced 2 years ago with impact-resistant glass, the small overhang with the downlight she used to leave on at night so patients could find the entrance. All of it was either burned through or blown out or collapsed inward. Smoke was still rising from the structure, thick and dark, and 2 fire trucks were parked diagonal across the street with their lights running, and there were people standing at the perimeter watching with the particular quiet that collects around destruction. She stood on the sidewalk and looked at it. Vincent appeared beside her. She didn't look at him. She couldn't take her eyes off the building. She'd spent 4 years in that space. She knew every complaint the plumbing had, every light fixture that buzzed on cold mornings, the way the back hallway smelled faintly of bleach, no matter how many times she'd tried different cleaning products. She knew where the floor creaked near the storage room door, and she knew which drawer in the exam room stuck in humid weather, and she knew that the 3rd chair in the waiting room had a wobble that she'd meant to fix for 8 months and never gotten around to. All of it was burning. She felt a hand on her arm, not grabbing, just present. "Nobody was inside," Vincent said quietly. "I confirmed it before we got out of the car." She knew that. She'd sent Delia and Santos home 2 days ago. She knew the clinic had been empty. She also knew that knowing something and feeling its weight were 2 different operations that sometimes ran simultaneously and sometimes refused to. "He said enjoy the clinic while you can," she said. Her voice came out flat and not quite right. "That was 20 minutes ago. He already had this planned before the meeting." "Yes." "He knew before he sent that text. He probably knew when he was sitting across the table from us." "Yes." She finally looked at Vincent. He was watching the building the way she'd watched patients in crisis. Not with detachment, but with the kind of attention that was trying to find what it could use. "This wasn't a message," she said. "He's not trying to scare me. He already tried that when he came to the clinic." "No. This is him taking away what I'd go back to." She held his gaze. "He's not pushing me out of your world. He's pulling my exit." Something shifted in Vincent's expression. She couldn't tell if it was respect or something closer to pain. "Yes," he said, for the third time. She looked back at the building. A section of the interior ceiling gave way somewhere inside. She could hear the crash of it, muffled by what was left of the walls, and a fresh column of smoke rose from the rear of the structure. The portable ultrasound was in the storage room, she said. It was a stupid thing to say. She was aware it was a stupid thing to say. It came out anyway. Vincent didn't respond to that. He understood she wasn't talking about the equipment. A firefighter approached them from the perimeter, a woman with a soot-marked jacket and an expression designed to deliver information efficiently. Do you have a connection to this property, ma'am? I own it, Claire said. I operate a medical clinic here. We're still working to contain the spread to the adjacent structures. Origin appears to be front of the building, possibly accelerant-assisted. The fire investigator is going to want to talk to you. I'll be available, Claire said. The firefighter gave her a card and moved back toward the perimeter. Claire looked at the card. The numbers on it were just numbers. She put it in her pocket. We need to go, Vincent said. Quiet, close. I know. Standing here, I know, she said again. Give me 1 minute. He gave her the minute. She used it to look at what was left, really look at it, fix it somewhere, so she wouldn't lose the specific texture of what this felt like. Because she'd learned a long time ago that the things you refused to fully feel had a way of finding you later in worse conditions. Then she turned and walked back to the car, and Vincent walked beside her, and neither of them said anything for the first 4 blocks. The penthouse was not what she'd expected. It occupied the top floor of a building in downtown Ravenport that looked from the outside like any other high-end residential address. Glass and steel and a lobby with a desk, and a man behind the desk who nodded at Vincent with the recognition of someone who had been paid well enough to forget what he saw. The elevator required a key. The floors between the lobby and the top were 12 of them, and the ride up was smooth and quiet. The doors opened directly into the space. She stood inside it and looked around. Large. That was the first word. Not luxurious in the expected sense. She'd anticipated something that looked like a hotel suite or a movie set, all leather and dark wood and overt declarations of money. What she found was different. The space was enormous and sparsely furnished in a way that read less like minimalism and more like a place where someone had never gotten around to finishing. Good furniture, well chosen, but not enough of it. The kitchen was professional grade and clearly rarely used. The windows were floor to ceiling and looked out over Ravenport's skyline in a view that was genuinely breathtaking and also, she noticed, positioned to see everything below while being very difficult to see into from the outside. There was almost nothing personal anywhere, no photographs, no objects that didn't have a function. The bookshelves held books, but they were arranged in a way that suggested they'd been placed by someone other than the person who lived there. It was a space that was secure and expensive and almost completely empty of anything that suggested habitation by a specific human being. She thought about what Vincent had said in the clinic. My father taught him that anyone he loved could eventually become ammunition for an enemy. She understood the penthouse differently after that. You can take the room at the end of the hall, Vincent said. He was moving toward the kitchen, favoring his left side slightly in a way she doubted he was aware of. There's a bathroom attached, whatever you need. I need my clinic back, Claire said. He stopped, turned. I know. I need to know what the plan is, she said. Not the broad version, the actual version. Because right now I'm standing in your apartment, in your world, with your ring on my finger and nothing left of mine, and I need to understand what we're working with. He pulled out one of the kitchen stools and sat down on it carefully, and she could see in that small movement the cost of the evening, the meeting, the drive, the standing on the street watching her clinic burn. He'd pushed past what she would have medically cleared him for, and his body was presenting its invoice. Russell is moving faster than I anticipated, he said. The meeting tonight didn't give him what he wanted, but it told him I'm more functional than he expected, which accelerates his timeline. How much time does he have before the captains either support him or they don't? He looked at her with something that might have been surprise at the precision of the question. Depending on what he tells them happened tonight, 2, maybe 3 days. And what do you need to do in those 2 or 3 days? I need financial records, he said. Russell has been stealing from my captains, not from me, from them. He's been redirecting money that should be going to them into his own accounts and covering it with my authorization signature. A pause. Forged authorization signature. How long has that been happening? Based on what I've been able to review, At least 18 months. And your captains don't know. Not yet. His jaw tightened. If they knew, this meeting tonight wouldn't have happened. He couldn't have called it. Half those men would have come for him directly. Claire pulled out a stool on the other side of the kitchen island and sat down. The ring on her finger caught the light. She looked at it briefly, then back at Vincent. So you need the records, she said. Who has them? My financial director, Vincent said. A man named Pryor. He's been with the organization for 11 years. He manages the accounts, has access to everything. He paused. He's also the reason I haven't been able to get the records yet. He's working with Russell. I don't know. Vincent said it carefully, like the words themselves had edges. I don't know if he's active, if he knows what Russell is doing and is covering it, or if he's passive, if Russell has been manipulating records in ways Pryor isn't fully aware of. He paused. The difference matters. Because if Pryor knows, he's a loose end Russell will eventually deal with. Yes. And if he doesn't know, he's a resource you can use. Yes. She looked at him. Which do you think? A long pause. I think Pryor is frightened. I think he knows more than he should and less than he'd need to in order to fully understand his position. Vincent pressed 2 fingers against the edge of the island. I think Russell has been careful about exactly how much he tells people. So Pryor might hand you the records if he understood what was actually happening. Possibly. Then you get to him without Russell knowing? That's the problem. Vincent was quiet for a moment. Russell has people watching Pryor. Not obviously, but they're there. Anyone I send to Pryor, Russell finds out about. Claire sat with that for a moment. Anyone you send, she said. He met her eyes. You're not asking me to go talk to a financial director, she said flatly. I'm not asking you to do anything. But you're thinking it. He didn't deny it. I'm a nurse from a community clinic, she said. Russell has already classified me, whatever category he put me in after tonight. It's not person who would approach my financial director for records. No, Vincent said. It isn't. She looked at the ring again, then at him. Tell me about Pryor, she said. She didn't sleep well. The room at the end of the hallway was comfortable in the specific way that expensive rooms are comfortable. The mattress was correct. The temperature was correct. The sheets were high quality. And none of it did anything about the images her brain kept returning to. Her clinic, the ceiling giving way, the card from the fire investigator with its ordinary numbers. She was up by 5:30. She made coffee in the professional-grade kitchen that had clearly not been used for actual cooking in some time. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows with her cup and looked at Ravenport waking up beneath her, and she thought about Pryor, and she thought about what she'd agreed to try, and she thought about the Carroway ring on her finger and what it meant that she'd left it on when she went to bed. Vincent was up by 6. She heard him before she saw him, the careful footstep of someone managing pain without wanting to announce it. He appeared in the kitchen doorway looking like he'd slept in segments rather than continuously, which she suspected was true and was probably better than she'd expected. She poured him coffee without asking. He took it the same way he had in the clinic, both hands, like it was something warm to hold. Pryor's office building, she said. When does he usually arrive? 8:15. He's regular about it. And the people Russell has watching him, they're watching who he meets with or watching his movements generally? Movements. Who comes and goes. So a woman who appears to be a patient at the medical practice on the 4th floor of his building wouldn't register, Vincent said. I was watching her. The medical practice is real. You'd need an appointment. I can get an appointment. How? She looked at him over her coffee cup. I'm a healthcare professional. I have colleagues. I know how medical offices work and how to navigate them. She paused. I also know to be unremarkable. That's a skill Russell apparently doesn't think I have. Vincent was quiet for a moment. She could see him running through it. The logistics, the risks, the variables he could and couldn't control. If anything feels wrong when you get there, I leave, she said. I'm not stupid and I'm not reckless. I'm going to have a conversation with a frightened accountant, not walk into a firefight. He might not cooperate. He might not, she agreed. But you said he's frightened. Frightened people are looking for a way out. I'm going to give him a picture of what his situation actually is and let him decide whether the records are worth more as protection for himself or as something he holds on to for Russell. She set down her cup. I do this every day in a different form. Patient education. helping people understand their situation clearly enough to make a decision. He looked at her for a long moment. "You're not what I expected," he said, for the second time. "You said that already. It keeps being true." She went and got ready. The building on Calder Street housed 7 businesses across 8 floors, which made the foot traffic through its lobby irregular enough to be unremarkable. Claire arrived at 8:05 in the same dark slacks and charcoal blouse from the night before, her clinic ID and her wallet, technically accurate, even if the clinic it referenced was now a structure awaiting a fire investigator's report, and a manner she'd spent 20 minutes in the penthouse bathroom calibrating. She checked in with the 4th-floor medical office as a provider inquiring about a patient referral process, which got her past the lobby without triggering anything visible. She took the elevator to the 4th floor, confirmed she was where she appeared to be, and waited. Pryor arrived at 8:19. She recognized him from the photograph Vincent had shown her. Mid-50s, soft-faced, the look of a man who had spent his career being good at numbers and invisible at everything else. He came off the elevator alone, carrying a laptop bag that was too heavy for him, and walked toward the far end of the hall where the financial management office occupied the corner suite. She fell into step beside him. "Mr. Pryor," she said quietly, "my name is Claire. I need 2 minutes of your time, and I need you not to react to this conversation in a way that makes it visible." He stopped walking. His face did something complicated and not quite controlled. "Keep walking," she said. Same quiet voice. "You're being watched from outside and probably from the lobby camera. If you stop and look at me, whoever's watching flags it." He started walking again. His breathing had changed. "I work with Vincent Carroway," she said. They were moving down the hall at an ordinary pace. "And I need you to understand something about your situation that I don't think Russell Vardell has been honest with you about." "I don't know who," he started. "You know exactly who," she said. "We both know exactly who. I'm not here to threaten you or pressure you. I'm here because you are in a position that is going to get significantly worse in the next 48 hours, and I think you deserve to understand that before it does." They reached his office door. He stopped with his hand on the handle and looked at her with the expression of a man whose blood pressure had just moved significantly in the wrong direction. "What position?" he said. "Inside," she said, "if you're willing." He unlocked the door. What she told him took 11 minutes. She laid it out the way she would have laid out a diagnosis, clearly, factually, without drama, giving him the information in the sequence that made it most comprehensible rather than most alarming. She told him what Vincent knew about the redirected funds. She told him about the forged signatures. She told him what it meant for the captains when they found out. And they would find out, because that information was going to come out regardless of what he did in the next 48 hours. She told him what happened to people who were holding records that implicated them when an organization looked for someone to be responsible. She watched his face move through stages. Denial, partial. Recognition, slow and devastating. The particular stillness that settles over someone who has just understood that the situation they thought they were managing had dimensions they'd missed. "I didn't know about the signatures," he said. His voice had gone thin. "I believe you," Claire said. And she did. She could read the difference between a man performing ignorance and a man processing the fact that he'd been used. Which is exactly why you have an option here that you won't have once this information becomes public. "What option?" "Give me the records," she said. "The actual financial records, the real ledger, not whatever version Russell has been presenting. Give them to me, and when this resolves, you are the man who cooperated, rather than the man who held on to documentation that implicated you." Pryor looked at his hands. He was quiet for a long time. "If Russell finds out, Russell is going to have considerably larger problems than you very soon," Claire said. "That's not a threat. It's a projection based on current trajectory." He was still looking at his hands. She waited. She was good at waiting. She'd sat beside patients who needed to arrive at their own decision rather than being pushed into one, and she'd learned that the waiting was sometimes the most important thing she could offer. "I need something in return," Pryor said. His voice had steadied slightly. "What?" "I need to know that when this is over, my exposure on this is—" "I can't make you a legal guarantee," she said. "I'm not an attorney, and that's not what I'm here to offer. What I can tell you is that Vincent Carroway keeps his word. If he tells you that you're clear, you're clear." A pause. "Is that good enough?" she asked. Another pause, longer. Yes, Pryor said. He opened his laptop. It took him 6 minutes to locate, compile, and transfer the relevant files to an encrypted drive. He pulled from his desk drawer. His hands shook slightly while he worked. She didn't comment on it. He handed her the drive. She put it in her jacket pocket. Don't change anything in your routine today, she said, standing. Don't call anyone, don't move anything, just go about your morning. And then? And then someone will be in contact with you about what comes next. She paused at there was ground beneath him. She left. She walked back down the hallway and took the elevator to the lobby and walked out of the building on Calder Street and kept moving at an ordinary pace for 2 blocks before she took out her phone and called the number Vincent had given her. I have it, she said when he picked up. A pause. Are you clear? He said. I'm clear. She turned a corner, put distance between herself and the building. The drive is encrypted. Pryor said he'll need to give you the access code directly. I'll handle that. Another pause, different from the first. Claire. I'm fine, she said, because she could tell that was the question. Come back. She went back. The drive changed things. She could see it in the hour that followed, Vincent reviewing the files on his laptop with a focus that had its own kind of intensity. The particular stillness of someone processing information that was confirming what they'd suspected while simultaneously being worse than they'd prepared for. She sat across the kitchen island and watched him, and didn't interrupt. At one point he looked up. 18 months, he said. It goes back 18 months. Pryor was right that he didn't know about the signatures. Russell found a way to authorize directly in 3 separate accounts using a secondary system. Pryor wasn't managing. He paused. The amount taken from the captains is... He named a number. Claire kept her expression neutral. The number was significant enough to matter even to people who dealt in significant numbers. They'll want blood, she said. They'll want Russell, Vincent said, which is what I'm going to give them. How? I need to call a meeting, tonight if possible. Present the records directly. Let them see it in his own documentation. He closed the laptop. This is over once they see it. Whatever support Russell has built evaporates the moment they understand he's been stealing from them. Claire nodded slowly. It was clean. It was logical. It was the kind of resolution that followed from having the right information in the right hands. She should have felt something release. Instead, she felt the specific unease of something she couldn't identify. A wrongness at the edge of the situation that she couldn't locate. She went to get more coffee, stood at the machine while it ran, tried to identify what her instincts were catching. She came back to the kitchen. Pryor told Russell you'd been to see him, she said. Vincent looked up from his phone. How do you know? I don't know, she said. I'm telling you what's possible. Pryor was frightened. Frightened people sometimes cover themselves from both directions. She held his gaze. How confident are you that he didn't make a call after I left? Vincent's expression shifted. The calculation behind his eyes moved faster. If Russell knows about the drive, he knows what's on it, she said. He built the system. He knows exactly what documentation exists. She set down her cup. If he knows you have it, the meeting you're planning isn't a trap you're springing. It's a trap you're walking into. Vincent was already reaching for his phone. The call connected in 2 rings. The man on the other end said something Claire couldn't hear. Vincent listened. His face changed, not dramatically, but completely. The controlled expression collapsed inward into something she'd never seen on him before. He ended the call. He set the phone on the counter. The waterfront meeting, he said. His voice had gone to a register she didn't recognize. Russell moved it. It's tonight, 2 hours from now. A pause. He sent invitations to all 9 captains in my name. Claire stared at him. In your name, she said, using my standing authorization, telling them I've obtained evidence of internal fraud and need to present it personally. He looked at her with something that was finally completely unguarded. Claire, the meeting is at the waterfront. It's not a negotiation point. It's a location he controls. He's calling all 9 of my captains to a place he controls, in my name, with the story that I'm coming to present financial evidence. The full shape of it landed. He's not coming after you, she said slowly. He doesn't need to, Vincent said. If 9 captains go to a waterfront meeting that I called, presenting evidence of fraud, and something happens to them there, I'm the one who called the meeting. I'm the one who sent the invitations. I'm the one with a documented motive regarding their stolen money. Claire felt the cold of it move through her. He doesn't need to take your position, she said. He just needs to make sure you can never hold it again. And then he steps in to manage the aftermath, Vincent said, as the man who tried to warn them about my instability. They looked at each other across the kitchen island. 9 men were heading to a waterfront location that Russell Vardell controlled, in response to invitations they believed came from Vincent Carroway, expecting to receive evidence of financial fraud. And in the penthouse on the top floor of a building in downtown Ravenport, Vincent had the actual evidence, the drive, the records, the documentation, and no way to reach those 9 men before they arrived somewhere they couldn't leave. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. He turned it to show her. The text was from a number she hadn't seen before. It said, "Your captains are already on their way, but I'll make you a trade. Send the wife to the waterfront instead. She comes alone. The captains go home." And below that, a photograph. The photograph was of her clinic's front door, taken from outside at night very recently. The timestamp in the corner read 40 minutes before the fire. Russell had been there. He'd stood outside her clinic and taken a photograph before he burned it. The message wasn't about tonight. It had never been about tonight. The message was that he had been patient and deliberate and thorough, and that patience and deliberation and thoroughness were going to continue. And the question now was not whether Claire was inside Vincent's world. The question was whether she had any world left outside it at all. Vincent set the phone down on the counter between them and looked at her with an expression she finally had a complete word for. It was the expression of a man who understood, fully and without mitigation, that the thing he'd invented to protect her had become the thing that made her a target, and that there was no version of undoing that which didn't require her to be at more risk than she'd ever signed up for. "Claire," he said. "Don't," she said. "I need to say—" "I know what you need to say," she said. "I know." She looked at the phone, at the photograph of her clinic door, at the timestamp. "But right now we don't have time for it." She picked up the phone. She looked at the photograph one more time, memorized the timestamp, set it back down. 9 captains, she said. Waterfront. How long before they arrive at the location? Vincent checked the time. 90 minutes, maybe less. And your people, the ones who are loyal. How many can you move in 90 minutes without Russell seeing it? He was looking at her with something that was trying to become an objection and hadn't gotten there yet. How many? She said again. He told her. She nodded once. Then here's what we're going to do, Claire Whitmore said, and her voice was the same voice she used when a patient coded in front of her, and there were 3 minutes to make a decision and no version of standing still that ended well, flat and fast, and completely without panic. Because panic was a luxury she'd stopped being able to afford around year 2, and she had just run out of years. The plan had 4 moving parts and 90 minutes to work. Claire laid it out at the kitchen counter while Vincent made calls, and she learned something in those first 10 minutes that she filed away without comment. Vincent Carroway was a different person when the situation stopped being manageable and became critical. The careful, measured quality he'd carried through the clinic days, the deliberate cooperation, the controlled reveals, compressed into something faster and colder and considerably more efficient. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't repeat himself. He said what needed to be said in the fewest words that would accomplish it, and the people on the other end of those calls responded in kind. She understood, watching him work, how he'd held what he held for as long as he had. The first call was to a man named Doyle, who handled what Vincent described only as logistics, and who received his instructions in under 45 seconds. The second call was to a woman Claire hadn't heard mentioned before. Vincent called her Reeves, no first name, and the conversation was brief and technical, and involved the words waterfront, East Dock approach, and confirmed positions in a sequence that told Claire that Reeves had information about that location that hadn't been gathered recently. She's been watching the waterfront, Claire said when he ended the call, since yesterday morning. You suspected the waterfront before tonight. I suspected Russell would use it. He's used it before. Vincent was already dialing again. It's his. He bought the property through 3 layers of company structure 8 years ago. I knew about it. He doesn't know I know. So you've been building toward this. I've been preparing for the version of this that I could anticipate. He looked at her briefly between calls. I didn't anticipate you. She wasn't sure what that meant and didn't have time to investigate it. The third call was the most important one. Vincent needed to reach the captains, all 9 of them, or as many as possible, before they arrived at the waterfront. The problem was that Russell had used Vincent's own authorization codes to send the invitations, which meant the captains had received what appeared to be a secure and verified communication from their boss. Calling them now to say "don't go" required them to believe that the voice on the phone was more reliable than the secured message they'd already received. 3 of them picked up, 2 didn't, 4 went to voicemail. Of the 3 who picked up, 2 agreed to hold. One, a man named Carver, whose voice Claire could partially hear through the phone, was aggressively skeptical and said things she couldn't fully make out, but whose tone communicated that he believed he was either being manipulated or being tested and wasn't sure which was worse. Vincent listened to Carver for 30 seconds without interrupting. Then he said, "The invitation you received had my authorization code in the header. What it didn't have was the secondary confirmation phrase that I require for any meeting involving all senior captains simultaneously. Check the header again. It's not there." A pause. "That phrase exists because Russell suggested it to me 4 years ago," Vincent said. "Ask yourself why he'd know to leave it out." He ended the call. He looked at Claire. "Carver," he said. "He'll hold. He's angry, but he's smart." "That's 3 confirmed," she said. 6 unaccounted for. "Reeves will intercept 2 of them. They're coming from the north route, and she knows their vehicles." He set the phone on the counter. "The remaining 4? I don't know." She looked at the clock on the microwave. 68 minutes. "Then we move," she said. The car was the same black vehicle from the night before. Same driver, whose name she'd learned was Garrett, and who navigated Ravenport's streets with the specific confidence of someone who'd spent years knowing which routes were watched and which weren't. Vincent sat in the back beside her, and she could feel in the close space of the car what the last hour had cost him physically. The controlled breathing again, the careful management of position that she recognized as pain mitigation. She didn't say anything about it yet. "Tell me the layout," she said instead. He told her. The waterfront property was a former shipping staging area, 3 large warehouse structures arranged around a central open dock space, with water on the east side and 2 vehicle approaches from the west and south. Russell would have people at both approaches, which meant the captain's vehicles would be seen and logged the moment they turned in. The east side was water access only, which Reeves and her people were approaching from. "Where does Russell expect this to happen?" Claire said. "The central dock space. Open. Visible from all 3 warehouse positions." "He wants them in the open." "Yes." "With coverage from the warehouses." "Yes." She looked at the window. They were moving south now, the city's density thinning as they approached the industrial district near the river. The lights were different down here, more orange, more spaced out, the particular nighttime texture of areas built for function rather than habitation. "Russell sent that text offering a trade," she said. "Me for the captains." "You're not going to "I know I'm not," she said, "but he sent it, which means he's hedging. He has a plan that works without the trade, but he'd prefer the trade." She thought about it. "He wants me there." "Because it solves his Vincent problem more completely," Vincent said. "If he can produce documentation that I sacrificed my captains to protect a civilian woman, a pretend wife, it reframes everything," she said. "Not just the fraud, your whole leadership record." She looked at him. "He's not just trying to take your position. He's trying to make it so you can never credibly claim anything. Ever." Vincent's jaw was set in a way she was familiar with now. The specific tension of someone managing something that required more from them than they were currently able to give. "How's the wound?" she said quietly. "Fine." "Vincent." A pause. "Managing," he said. "On a scale. A scale doesn't help either of us right now. It helps me assess what you can do in the next 60 minutes. He looked at her. Something moved through his expression, something that in a different circumstance might have been the beginning of resistance and then wasn't. 6, he said, maybe 7. She nodded. She'd expected worse, which either meant he was telling the truth or had recalibrated his tolerance threshold significantly since leaving the clinic. She suspected both. "The sutures are intact," she said. "I checked this morning, but if you take a hit to that side, I won't." "If you do," she said, "tell me immediately. Don't manage it silently and make a decision that costs you more than the pain. He looked at her for a moment. You're doing it again, he said. Doing what? Treating me like a patient. You are my patient, she said. You'll be my patient until I formally discharge you. I haven't done that yet. Something crossed his face that she recognized as the not-quite smile. It came and went in less than a second. Noted, he said. Garrett slowed the car. Through the windshield, Claire could see the edge of the waterfront district, the orange lights giving way to the darker, wider spacing of industrial property, the silhouette of warehouse rooflines against a sky that was overcast enough to make everything indistinct. 2 minutes, Garrett said, quietly. Just information. Vincent sat forward. His hand went to his jacket in a gesture she identified a half-second later. She'd seen patients do the same thing, reaching for something they needed before they walked into something difficult. There are 3 of Russell's men at the south approach, Garrett said. Reeves confirmed 2 minutes ago. She has the east side. Doyle has the west. The captain's vehicles, Vincent said. 2 confirmed in the holding point north of here. Carver's vehicle among them. A pause. 4 others are unaccounted for. 4. Same 4 as before. Claire felt the arithmetic of it and didn't like it. The car stopped. They were in the shadow of a building that smelled of old metal and river water, half a block from the southern edge of the waterfront property. Through the gap between structures, she could see the edge of the open dock space, the emptiness of it, which meant nobody had arrived yet, or everyone was already inside the warehouses. Reeves goes in 3 minutes, Vincent said. Doyle after confirmation. And you, Garrett said. Not a question, a prompt. Vincent looked at Claire. I need 60 seconds with you, she said. Garrett got out of the car and stood at a distance that was professional and complete. Vincent turned to face her in the close dark of the back seat. She could see him clearly enough. The set of his jaw, the controlled steadiness he was performing for himself as much as for anyone. She reached into the bag she'd brought from the penthouse. She'd repacked a basic medical kit. Not comprehensive, not what she'd have in a clinic, but functional. Compression materials. Wound closure strips as backup for sutures under stress. 2 syringes. She'd also brought clean dressings and had changed his bandaging before they left, which he'd allowed without comment. If something tears, she said, holding his gaze, you tell me. Not later. Immediately. Claire, that's the condition, she said. You walk in there, I walk in there, yes, I'm going with you. Don't look at me like that. And the condition is that you tell me immediately if something tears. Because a man bleeding through his jacket in front of 9 captains and Russell Vardell is not a man who's going to come out of this with what he needs. He looked at her for a long moment. You're not going with me, he said. Russell's text offered a trade, she said. You walking in there without me tells him the trade was rejected, which tells him his backup plan activates, which means whatever he has in those warehouses is exactly why you're not going. Is exactly why I am, she said. Because Russell has been 3 steps ahead of every move you've made since that ambush. The only thing he hasn't been ahead of is me. Because he doesn't think I'm a variable. He thinks I'm leverage. She held his gaze. Let him keep thinking that. Silence in the car was different from the silence they'd gotten used to over the last 4 days. It was the silence of 2 people who had run out of positions to negotiate from. Stay behind me, he said finally. If anything moves, I'll be where I need to be, she said. He nodded once. It looked like it cost him something. They got out of the car. The waterfront had a sound that was specific to it, water against concrete, somewhere below the dock level, and the creak of old structures adjusting to temperature, and beneath all of it, a quiet that was too complete to be natural, the kind of quiet that meant people were being still on purpose. Vincent walked at a pace she matched, his right side slightly forward, his left arm held close to his body in a way that probably registered as nothing to anyone who didn't know what they were looking for. She walked beside him, not behind, because walking behind him sent a message she didn't want to send. They came around the edge of the structure into the open dock space. Russell was already there. He was standing in the center of the dock space with 3 men visible and the warehouse doors open behind him in a way that meant more people inside or the suggestion of more people inside, which functioned the same way. I was wearing a coat she hadn't seen before, and his expression, when he saw them, went through a sequence of adjustments that she tracked carefully. Surprise. real surprise for 1/2 second, then recalculation, then the patient-managed expression he'd worn at every interaction she'd had with him. Then his eyes found her, and something in them sharpened. "Vincent," he said, "I didn't expect a personal appearance." "I know," Vincent said. "And Claire." The warmth he performed was thinner tonight. "That's a surprise." "I imagine it is," she said. Russell's eyes moved between them, reading, calculating. She could see him trying to identify the approach, what they knew, what they'd brought, what the goal was. "Where are their captains?" Vincent said. "On their way." A pause. "Most of them." "3 of them are not coming," Vincent said. "The ones who recognized that a meeting invitation requiring all senior captains simultaneously lacked the secondary confirmation protocol." Something moved across Russell's face. Gone fast, but there. "And the others," he said, "are going to hear what I'm about to tell you first," Vincent said, "because they deserve to hear it in sequence." He reached into his jacket and produced a folded set of papers. Printed documents, Claire recognized. She'd watched him print them from the drive before they left the penthouse. Not the full records. A summary. Specific accounts, specific amounts, specific dates of transfer, with the secondary authorization pathway Russell had constructed clearly visible in the documentation structure. He held them out. Russell didn't take them. 18 months, Vincent said. 4 accounts. 3 of which were routed through a secondary authorization system that Pryor wasn't managing. He kept his voice level. "You told 9 captains that you were concerned about my financial judgment. The documentation I have tells a different story." Russell was quiet for 3 seconds. She counted. "Where did you get that?" he said. His voice had changed. The warmth was entirely gone. "Pryor," Vincent said, "who would like very much to be considered cooperative in whatever follows." "Pryor doesn't have access to—" Russell stopped. He'd heard himself. He understood what he'd just confirmed. The dock space held its breath. Then Russell moved his hand. Not toward Vincent, a different direction, a signal, and from both warehouse doorways figures emerged, and Claire counted 6 before she stopped counting because the number was sufficient to understand the situation. "You came here with a nurse," Russell said, "and a folder." His voice had dropped into something quiet and almost conversational. "Vincent, I've known you for 15 years. I watched your father build this organization. I helped you hold it together when he died." He paused. "And you came here with a nurse and a folder." "I came here with the truth," Vincent said. "The folder is just the physical version of it." "The truth." Russell's tone made something contemptuous of the word. "The truth is that you are standing on a dock with a gunshot wound that's 6 days old, with 6 of my people around you, and whatever Reeves has on the east side and whatever Doyle has on the west isn't going to change the numbers in this space right now." He knew about Reeves and Doyle. Claire felt that information land in her chest like something cold. He'd known. He'd let the approach happen because he'd wanted them in the open space. He'd wanted exactly this, Vincent in the center of the dock, the documentation produced, the play made, because from here the next move was his, and he'd constructed it that way from the beginning. Vincent had known it was a possibility. She could see in the stillness of him that he'd known. He hadn't told her because she wouldn't have come. She looked at the 6 men emerging from the warehouses. She looked at the 3 who'd been with Russell at the start. She looked at the water on the east side and the 2 western approach points and ran the arithmetic of it in under 4 seconds. And then she heard vehicles. Not from the west, not from the approach points Russell controlled. From the north. From the direction of the holding point where Carver's vehicle had been confirmed. 1 engine, then 2, then more, and then headlights cutting through the gap between the northern warehouse and the dock space perimeter, and the first vehicle came around the edge of the building and stopped, and the door opened, and a man she recognized from the meeting the night before, broad, gray-haired, the one who'd shifted in his chair when she'd asked Russell her question, stepped out and looked across the dock space at the arrangement in front of him. Then the second vehicle. Then the third, Carver. 3 captains and the people they'd brought with them. Russell's count changed. She watched him understand that it changed. "Carver," Russell said. His voice had found its warmth again, the performed version. "I'm glad you made it. You should know that Vincent has made some serious—" "I checked the header on the invitation," Carver said. He was looking at the printed documents in Vincent's hand. He crossed the dock space in 12 steps and held out his hand without looking at Russell. Vincent gave him the documents. He read for 30 seconds. The secondary phrase. Wasn't there? Vincent said. Russell suggested it. Carver's voice had gone flat. 4 years ago, I was in the room. Russell said something. She didn't catch all of it. Her attention had moved because one of the 6 men from the warehouses had shifted his position, and the shift was in a direction that changed the geometry of the space, and she put her hand on Vincent's arm. He felt it, didn't look at her, adjusted his own position by half a step. Those accounts, Carver said, still looking at the documents. The amounts on these dates. He looked up at Russell. We had a shortfall in November. You told me it was a distribution error. It was $340,000, Carver said. Distribution error. The dock space was different now. The 6 men from the warehouses were still present, but the calculation had shifted on all of them. She could see it in the way they were holding their bodies, the recalibration of who they were standing near and what that meant. Russell looked at Vincent. The patient expression was still there, but it had thinned to something underneath it, and what was underneath it was colder than anything she'd seen on him yet. You had Pryor in your pocket for how long? Russell said. Pryor came to me, Vincent said. He was worried about his exposure. Pryor is a frightened man who made the rational decision, Vincent said. You should understand that impulse. Something broke in Russell's expression. Not catastrophically. He was too controlled for that. But a fracture moved through the managed surface of it, and what came through was something genuine for the first time in all her interactions with him. It wasn't anger. It was something that had the structure of fury, but the texture of something older and more complicated. He reached into his coat. Everything in the dock space moved at once. Claire dropped. She didn't decide to. Her body dropped before her conscious mind caught up, which was the same thing that happened in a trauma bay when something came loose from an IV line and sprayed arterial blood and her training moved her hands before her thoughts did. She was beside the concrete dock, piling with her back against it before she'd fully processed the decision. She heard voices, sharp, overlapping, the particular register of commands being issued and countermanded simultaneously. She heard Carver's voice very loudly, one word. She heard what might have been Russell's voice, and then a sound that was not a gunshot, but was adjacent to one. Something struck, something falling. Then Vincent's voice. Close! She looked up. He was beside her. He'd moved when she moved, or he'd moved first and she'd followed. She couldn't reconstruct the sequence. He was crouched against the same piling, his left hand pressed flat against the concrete, and in the low light she could see the controlled breathing she recognized. Talk to me, she said. I'm fine. Vincent, I'm fine. He looked at her directly. In the low and uncertain light of the waterfront, with the sounds of the dock space resolving into something she was trying to parse, he looked at her with an expression that was stripped of every managed layer. Are you? Yes, she said. She looked around the piling. Russell was on the ground. Not, she assessed rapidly, reading what her eyes gave her. Not seriously injured, disarmed. Carver's people had moved fast, and the man who'd shifted positions from the warehouse, the one she'd tracked, was now sitting on the dock concrete with his hands visible while 2 of Carver's people stood over him. The other 5 men from the warehouses had, in the calculus of the shifted moment, made the decision that defined their next several hours and possibly years. 3 of them were not in positions of resistance. 2 were, but the math had resolved against them, and they seemed to be arriving at that conclusion. Russell was looking at the sky. Carver was standing over him. Get up, Carver said. Russell got up. Slowly, with the specific indignity of a man whose plan has been physically interrupted, whose coat was dirty, and whose managed expression had entirely failed to survive the last 60 seconds. He stood and looked at the people around him. 9 captains and their people, Doyle's crew coming through the west approach. Now that the warehouse positions had collapsed, Reeves visible at the east edge with 2 others, he looked at Vincent. Vincent had straightened up from beside the piling. He was upright, and he was pale, and his left arm was held close to his body in a way Claire was watching with sustained attention because she needed to know in the next 30 seconds whether she had a medical situation. The documentation goes to all 9 captains tonight, Vincent said. His voice was steady. Every account, every transfer, every forged authorization. He paused. Every man in this organization who's missing money knows by morning where it went. Russell said nothing. Your people here, Vincent said, are going to make their own decisions about tonight. Some of them already have. He looked at the three men who'd stepped back from resistance. That's noted. You can't hold this together, Russell said. His voice had finally found something honest in it. Not performative now, just direct. You think this fixes it. You think papers fix it. This organization has spent 15 years being run a certain way, and you pulling back from it isn't your concern anymore, Vincent said. It's everyone's concern. You think these men want— Russell, Carver's voice, flat and final. Stop. Russell stopped. He looked at Carver with something that might have been surprise, the surprise of a man who'd spent 18 months building a case to these 9 captains, and was discovering that the case had not built what he'd thought it built. You stole from me, Carver said. In November. You looked at me across a table and told me it was a distribution error. My people had a difficult winter because of a $340,000 distribution error. His jaw was set in a way that made the dock space smaller. You had one job in this conversation, and that was to be the man who wouldn't do that. The silence on the dock was complete except for water and wind and the sound of 9 men not moving. Claire was watching Vincent's left side. Something was wrong. She could see it now. The way he was holding that arm, the specific angle of his shoulder. She came around the piling and crossed the dock to him in 6 steps. She put her hand on his arm, lightly. He looked at her. Tell me, she said. Quiet. Just between them. His jaw moved. The piling, he said. When I came down, left side. She reached inside his jacket. Her hand came back with blood on it. Not catastrophic. Not arterial. Not the volume that meant immediate critical failure. But the suture line had given way somewhere on the impact, and the wound that had been healing for 6 days was open again and needed pressure and needed it now. She looked at his face. He was upright and functioning, and nobody else in the dock space was looking at them in this precise moment. All attention was on Russell and Carver and the resolution of the immediate standoff. I need you to stay standing for approximately 4 more minutes, she said. I can do that. And then you're going to let me deal with this. Yes. She pressed her hand against his side over the jacket, applying the pressure she needed to apply. He didn't make a sound. She looked at the dock space over his shoulder while she held the pressure, watching Carver, watching Russell, watching the men who were resolving into positions of cooperation and the 1 or 2 who hadn't yet. Doyle, Vincent said, loud enough to carry. Steady voice. Nobody looking at them would know. Take Russell to the South Warehouse. Carver, I need 10 minutes with you and Reeves before anyone leaves. Doyle moved. 2 of his people moved with him. Russell walked toward the South Warehouse with the measured pace of a man deciding how much of his dignity to preserve, and the answer appeared to be, not very much of it, but some. Carver crossed the dock to Vincent. He looked at him with the assessing attention of a man who'd known him for years and was seeing something he recognized and something he didn't. His eyes went briefly to Claire's position. Your wife, Carver said. Yes, Vincent said. Carver looked at her for a moment, then back at Vincent, then at the documentation he was still holding. 10 minutes, Carver said. Then we talk about what comes next. He walked toward Reeves. Claire increased the pressure against Vincent's side marginally. He pulled in a breath through his nose, controlled, precise. That's going to need sutures again, she said. I know. I have what I need in the bag. I know. You could have told me about Reeves and Doyle knowing, she said, before we got out of the car. Yes. Why didn't you? He was quiet for a moment. The dock around them was managing itself. Doyle's people, Carver's people, the complicated human arithmetic of a situation that had resolved in a direction nobody could have fully predicted 30 minutes ago. Because you would have rethought coming, he said. She looked at him. He looked back at her with that completely unguarded expression, the one she'd only seen once before, in the penthouse kitchen, when the shape of Russell's full plan had become clear. And you needed me here, she said. Yes. A pause. Not as leverage, not as the wife. His jaw was working against the pain, but his eyes were clear. I needed you here because you're the only person in the last 6 days who hasn't been managing me. She held his gaze. Hold this, she said, and took his hand and placed it over hers against his side. Keep the pressure exactly here. She reached into the bag. Around them, the waterfront resolved into the kind of controlled aftermath that followed when a plan had worked at significant cost, and the cost was still being calculated. Voices at the edges. Decisions being made. The sound of Ravenport's industrial waterfront doing what it always did, indifferent to the human accounting happening on its concrete surface. She prepared what she needed and worked by the light of her phone, and Vincent stood and breathed and held the pressure where she'd told him to hold it, and above them the overcast sky pressed down over the city, and somewhere in the south warehouse, Russell Vardell was sitting with the remains of 18 months of deliberate planning and working out which version of the next conversation cost him the least. "When this is over," Vincent said quietly. Not a question, not finished. She looked up from what she was doing. He was looking at her with something in his expression she wasn't ready to fully receive and set down carefully. "When this is over," she said, "you're going to need 2 weeks of actual recovery, not penthouse recovery, real recovery. No calls, no meetings, no standing on waterfront docks in the middle of the night." "Is that a medical prescription?" "It's a condition," she said. He almost smiled. The real version, she thought. The one that wasn't quite a smile but existed fully behind his eyes. "Done," he said. She finished what she was doing. She stood up and looked at the dock space. Carver coming back toward them, Reeves behind him, the waterfront holding the weight of what had just happened across its old concrete surface. Whatever came next was going to require everything she had left. And standing there on the dock with the cold river smell and the overcast sky and the sound of a city that kept moving. Regardless of the human weight it carried, Claire Whitmore realized she still had more left than she'd known when this started. Carver stayed on the waterfront for 40 minutes. That was how long it took to do what needed to be done in the sequence it needed to be done in. The documentation reviewed in full. The accounts cross-referenced against what each captain's own record showed. The gap between what they'd been told and what had actually moved through the organization, made visible in numbers that didn't require interpretation. Numbers had a specific quality in a room full of people who'd spent their careers understanding them. They didn't need framing. They didn't need a narrator. They sat on the page and declared themselves. Claire watched it happen from 20 feet away, where she'd positioned herself against the hood of one of Carver's vehicles after finishing with Vincent's wound. She'd sutured it in the field, which was not what she would have chosen, and was what the situation provided, and the result was functional rather than elegant. It would hold. She told him that and meant it, and also meant the unspoken part, which was that it would hold if he didn't do anything else stupid tonight, a condition she was not entirely confident he would meet. He was standing with Carver and 3 other captains near the edge of the dock space, and he was standing the way she'd trained him to stand over the last 4 days. Weight distributed, left side managed, the pain present, and controlled and invisible to anyone who wasn't watching the way she was watching. Reeves appeared at her elbow without announcement. She was compact and dark-haired and moved with the specific economy of someone who'd spent years being effective in situations where visibility was a liability. She looked at the dock and then at Claire with an expression that was assessing without being unfriendly. "You're the nurse," Reeves said. "Yes?" "He said you'd be there when we moved in." A pause. "He didn't say you'd be sutured him on the dock." "Improvisation," Claire said. Reeves almost smiled. "He also said—" She stopped, started again differently. "He talks about you differently than he talks about most things." Claire looked at her. "I've worked with Vincent Carroway for 6 years," Reeves said. "I've never heard him use a person's name the way he uses yours." She wasn't performing warmth. She was delivering information in the same flat and functional way she'd probably delivered every other piece of information in her professional life. "I thought you should know that." She walked away before Claire could respond. The documentation went to all 9 captains before midnight. Vincent had arranged for digital copies to reach each of them through secured channels, Pryor's compiled records, the secondary authorization structure, the 18-month timeline of transfers. The physical copies Carver had reviewed on the dock became the primary record for what followed, which was a conversation in the South warehouse that lasted 2 hours and that Claire was not present for. She waited in Garrett's car. She had coffee from a thermos. Garrett produced from somewhere without being asked, which she was grateful for in the specific way you're grateful for small, functional things when large, complicated things are unresolved. She sat with the thermos and watched the south warehouse through the windshield and waited. Vincent came out at 2:17 in the morning. He walked to the car with the careful deliberateness she'd watched all night, opened the door, and got in. He sat for a moment without saying anything. In the low light from the waterfront's remaining overhead fixtures, she could see that the color had come back to his face somewhat, which was medically relevant, and that he was carrying something in his expression that was the specific exhaustion of a situation that had resolved in your favor at considerable cost. "Russell," she said. "Stripped," he said. "Authority, protection, accounts, position." He paused. "He'll be turned over to the men he stole from to determine what comes next." Another pause. "That's not my decision anymore. It became theirs the moment the money left their accounts." She absorbed that. "The 4 captains who went to the waterfront," she said, "the ones who didn't get your call. 3 of them understood the situation quickly enough once Carver's people were there. One of them—" He stopped. "One of them had been actively cooperating with Russell for 6 weeks. Not the theft. The organizational undermining." A pause. "He made his position clear when the situation clarified. And he'll have time to reconsider his position at length," Vincent said. His voice was flat, not cruel, just stating the shape of consequences. She looked at the warehouse. "It's over." "This part of it." She looked at him. There's more," she said. "There's always more," he said. There's the organizational accounting, the financial reconstruction. There are relationships that need rebuilding and ones that can't be rebuilt, and the work of knowing which is which." He looked at his hands for a moment. "But the thing that started when someone put a bullet in me 6 days ago and drove me through your door, that part is over." She sat with that. "My clinic," she said, "will be rebuilt." He met her eyes. "I gave you my word." "You gave me your word before tonight. It's still good." She looked at the thermos in her hands. She thought about the portable ultrasound in the second box of supplies, which was now presumably a melted artifact in the wreckage on the east side. She thought about the 3rd chair in the waiting room with its wobble she'd never fixed. She thought about Delia's text that she still hadn't fully responded to. "Not rebuilt," she said. "Replaced. Bigger. On a deed that belongs entirely to me with no organizational interest attached." "Yes. And you stay out of it," she said. "Not physically. I'm not saying you can never walk in the door. I'm saying it doesn't become part of whatever you're running. It doesn't become a location on anyone's map. It's a community medical clinic. And it serves the people. It's always served. And it has nothing to do with the Carroway organization." "Agreed." "And Delia and Santos," she said. "Their names are never spoken in any context connected to any of this. Ever." "Yes." "And Pryor," she said. "Whatever arrangement you make with him, he was frightened and he cooperated and he didn't have to, and I made him a representation about how that would be treated." Vincent looked at her steadily. "I'll honor it." She nodded once. She believed him. She'd spent 6 days developing a fairly calibrated sense of where Vincent Carroway told the truth and where he didn't, and the truth was that he told it more consistently than she'd expected when she'd first learned his name, not because he was a good man in the uncomplicated sense, but because he was a precise one, and precision required accuracy about what you were committing to. "Take me home," she said. He reached forward and said something to Garrett, and the car moved. She meant back to the penthouse. She didn't have anywhere else to go tonight. She was aware of the ring on her finger and the bag in her lap, and the fact that she was riding through Ravenport at 2 in the morning in the car of a mafia boss who had, over 6 days, become something she didn't have a clean category for. She thought about Reeves. He talks about you differently than he talks about most things. She looked out the window at the city going by. She wasn't ready to look at that yet. She put it somewhere she could find it later and watched the streets instead. The penthouse was quiet when they got back. The kind of quiet that belonged specifically to very late night in a high building above a city, removed from the street noise, the windows full of reflected light from below, the space holding the temperature of a place that had been sealed and waiting. She got Vincent out of his jacket and checked the field sutures under better light. They'd held. She cleaned the area again and replaced the outer dressing and told him the same thing she'd told him every night in the clinic, which was that the wound was progressing appropriately given what it had been subjected to. "You're lucky," she said. "Again." "I've been told," he said, "you're going to need actual imaging tomorrow. The portable ultrasound is gone, but I have a colleague at Ravenport General who owes me a conversation and won't ask unnecessary questions. I know a radiologist. I'm sure you do. She secured the last piece of tape. I'm going to call my colleague anyway. Mine doesn't have organizational context for this, which is what I prefer. He sat still while she worked and didn't argue about the colleague, which she took as an indicator of how tired he actually was. She cleaned up the dressing materials. She washed her hands at the kitchen sink and stood looking at the water running over them for a moment longer than was strictly necessary. "You should sleep," she said. "Yes. The wound is going to be significantly more painful tomorrow when the adrenaline's fully cleared. That's normal. I have what you need for it." "Claire." She turned off the water, turned around. I was sitting at the kitchen counter looking at her with that expression, the unguarded one, the one that had no managed layers left in it, and she thought about the fact that it had taken 6 days and a gunshot wound and a burning clinic and a waterfront standoff to get to a face that simply said what it was. "Say it," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "I know what I put you in," he said. "Not just tonight, all of it. The lie I used to protect you became the thing that cost you everything you'd built." He wasn't looking away from her. "The clinic, the safety of your staff, your ability to walk away from my world." He paused. "I know the weight of that." She leaned against the kitchen counter across from him. "Russell would have hurt me that first night regardless," she said. "You said it was temporary, and you believed that when you said it. You didn't cause the fire." "I caused the conditions that led to it." "Yes," she said. "You did." She held his gaze. "And I made decisions too. I let you stay. I went to the meeting. I went to Pryor. I was on that dock tonight." She paused. "I made those decisions." "You made them because I gave you no other options." "You gave me fewer options than I'd have liked," she said. "That's not the same as none." She crossed her arms, not defensively, just finding a position for herself. "I'm a grown woman who's been making difficult decisions in difficult conditions for 12 years. Don't take that from me by making my choices yours." He looked at her. "I'm not absolved," he said, quiet and clear. "No," she agreed. "You're not. And neither is Russell, who made his own choices. And neither am I, who made mine. That's how it actually works." She paused. "You're accountable for what you did. That's different from being the sole cause of everything that followed." A long silence. "You're more complicated than you looked at 3 a.m., he said. "You looked like a body that was going to bleed to death on my floor at 3 a.m., she said. "Most things are more complicated than that." He almost smiled. The real version. It stayed a moment longer this time. She pushed off the counter and picked up the dressing materials bag. "Sleep," she said. "I mean it. 8 hours minimum." "And you?" "I'll sleep when I'm ready." She paused at the edge of the kitchen. "Vincent." He looked at her. "Thank you," she said. "For tonight. Not the plan and not the outcome. The part where you told me." She paused, searching for the exact words. "The part where you told me it wasn't about leverage." He held her gaze. "It hasn't been about leverage for a while," he said. She nodded once and walked down the hall to the room at the end. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long time before she lay down. She looked at the ring on her finger. She didn't take it off. She slept. The next 3 months were not a clean line from chaos to resolution. That was the first thing Claire would have told you if you'd asked her to describe that period, which nobody did because nobody outside a very small number of people knew the full shape of what had happened. The Whitmore Community Trauma Center didn't rise from the ashes in a single decisive gesture. It came back the way most real things come back, in stages, with complications, with contractor disputes and permitting delays, and 1 week in the second month, where a problem with the foundation drainage threatened to push the timeline back by 6 weeks. Claire spent that week on the phone with the project manager every morning and reviewing updated drawings every night, and did not, during any of it, ask Vincent to make the problem go away. He didn't offer. She noticed that. He'd understood without being told twice what the parameters were. Delia came back first, before the building was finished, because there was administrative work to do, and Delia was constitutionally incapable of being useful at a distance. She showed up at the temporary space Claire had arranged, a leased unit 2 blocks from the original site, basic but functional, with 2 boxes of supplies she'd acquired somewhere, and a look on her face that made clear she had a significant number of questions she was choosing, for now, not to ask. "The new building," Delia said. "The deed." "My name," Claire said. "Entirely." Delia nodded once. "The funding." "My arrangement," Claire said. "My terms." Delia looked at her for a moment. She was a precise reader of people. She'd been doing intake assessments for 4 years, and you developed a sensitivity for what wasn't being said. "Are you okay?" Delia said. "I'm working on it," Claire said. That was the truth. She was working on it in the specific way that people work on things they can't fully process until the immediate crisis is over, and the immediate crisis had been over for approximately 11 days, and she was beginning to feel, in the margins of her days, the weight of what had accumulated. She was also, in those same margins, in contact with Vincent. Not constantly. Not in ways that were visible to anyone or required explanation. He called twice in the first week. Brief calls, practical, about the building project and about Pryor's situation, which had resolved in the way she'd asked for. She called him once about something tangential, and then admitted, when he asked, that the tangential thing was actually just a reason to call, and he said, "I know," in a tone that was entirely free of satisfaction. She went to see him at the penthouse on the 22nd day. She told herself she was going to check the wound, which had needed a follow-up assessment, and which her colleague at the hospital had looked at 10 days earlier and confirmed was healing correctly. The wound did not require a house call on day 22. She went anyway. He opened the door himself. No bodyguard, no assistant. He looked considerably better than he had on the waterfront. Color restored, movement easier, the managed quality he'd been carrying for 2 weeks beginning to lift. He looked at her for a moment. "The wound is fine," she said. "I know," he said. "I have a follow-up next week." "I know. I set it up." She paused. "Can I come in?" He stepped back from the door. The penthouse looked slightly different. Not dramatically. Nothing had been renovated or redesigned. But there were small changes she registered. A photograph on the shelf near the window that hadn't been there before. 2 books on the kitchen counter with their spines cracked from actual reading. A coffee mug on the table that suggested recent occupancy rather than the preserved in amber quality the space had carried before. Small things, but present. She sat at the kitchen counter and he made coffee, and they talked for 2 hours about things that were both practical and not. The building, the organizational restructuring he was navigating, the 2 captains who'd required significant conversations and the ones who hadn't. The question of what the Carroway organization looked like in 2 years if he followed through on the withdrawal from its most violent operational sectors. She asked him once, directly, if he was actually going to do it or if it was something he was saying because it sounded like what someone in his position should say. He was quiet for a moment. "My father ran this organization by making himself indispensable to things that required violence to sustain," he said. "When he died, I inherited the violence as a feature rather than a function." He looked at the coffee in his hands. "The legitimate holdings, shipping, construction, real estate, they make money. They made money before my father added the other things because someone told him he needed them for leverage." Did he need them? At a certain point, he believed he did. And then they became the thing that made the leverage necessary. He paused. "I've been looking at the accounts. The legitimate side carries the operation. The other side costs more to maintain than it generates, once you account for the operational overhead of not being arrested." She looked at him. "That's a financial argument." "Yes. Not a moral one." He met her eyes. "Both," he said. "In that order. Because the financial argument I can defend in a room full of people who care about money. The moral argument requires a different kind of conversation." He paused. "This is that conversation." She held his gaze for a moment. "I know you're not an innocent man," she said. "I know you know. And I'm not asking you to pretend otherwise." "I'm not going to," he said, "ever." He set down the cup. "What I'm telling you is that the version of what I run in 2 years can look different from what it is right now. Not clean. Not cleared. Different." He paused. "I thought you should hear that from me directly, rather than infer it." She was quiet for a moment. "Okay," she said. He looked at her. "Okay," she said again. She left an hour later and drove herself home and sat in her car outside the building she was renting a room in while the trauma center was being rebuilt, and thought about what it meant that she'd driven to the penthouse to check on a wound that didn't need checking and had stayed for 2 hours talking about organizational restructuring and the relationship between financial and moral arguments. She thought about the ring, which was in the small zippered pocket of her bag because she'd taken it off after the waterfront and hadn't put it back on and hadn't been able to throw it away. She sat with all of it for a while. Then she went upstairs and called Delia and talked about the drainage problem for 20 minutes, and that was enough for one day. The Whitmore Community Trauma Center opened on a Tuesday in March, which was not a day with any particular symbolic significance. Claire had not chosen it for meaning. She'd chosen it because that was when the final inspection cleared and the equipment was certified and the staff had completed their orientation, and there was no practical reason to wait another day. The building was larger than the original. Same location, same neighborhood, same purpose. But the footprint was expanded to accommodate a rehabilitation space she'd wanted for years, and a pediatric room and a separate entrance for patients who needed to arrive in ways that weren't visible from the main street. The equipment was current. The monitoring systems were correct. The third chair in the waiting room had a wobble that she'd meant to have the contractors fix and hadn't gotten around to yet. She kept it. She wasn't sure why. She kept it anyway. Delia was there at 6 in the morning because Delia was always there before Claire was. Santos had come back and brought with him a recently graduated nurse named Torres, who he'd met during the closure period and who had the exact combination of steadiness and controlled aggression that trauma medicine selected for. The physician's assistant was back. They had added a part-time practitioner who came Wednesday and Friday and whose Spanish was better than anyone else on staff. The first patient arrived at 7:14, a man Claire had seen 6 or 7 times over the years, one of the undocumented workers from the construction sites on the north end, with a recurring shoulder injury from lifting that he'd been managing with over-the-counter medications and stubbornness. He came in looking at the new space with the expression of someone trying to determine if the thing they needed had been replaced with something that no longer served them. Same clinic, Claire told him, just bigger. He sat down in the chair nearest the door, not the wobbly one, and waited. She treated him. She treated 17 people that first day, which was below what she expected the average to become once word spread that the center had reopened. She didn't advertise. She didn't need to. The east side of Ravenport had its own communication systems, and they were more efficient than anything she could have designed. At 5:30, after the last patient and before the final charting, she was standing in the new rehabilitation space looking at the equipment, at the things she'd had on her wish list for years now present and functional and real, when she heard the front door open. She knew who it was before she turned around. She couldn't have explained precisely how she knew, except that she'd spent 6 days developing a detailed catalog of how Vincent Carroway moved through a space and the way the air in a room changed when he entered it, and her nervous system had retained that information with the same fidelity it retained clinical data. She turned. He was alone. No Garrett, no Reeves, no organizational entourage. He was wearing clothes that were good but not conspicuously expensive. Dark jacket, no tie. And he looked like he'd walked rather than driven, which she somehow doubted, but which was the impression he was presenting. He stopped just inside the door and looked at the space. She watched him look at it. She watched him take in the waiting room and the updated equipment, and the hallway leading to the exam rooms, and the rehabilitation space visible through the glass partition. She watched him look at all the things that had been built from what Russell Vardell had burned, and she watched something move through his expression that he didn't manage or control or direct. She let him have it. After a moment, he looked at her. "It's right," he said. "Yes," she said. He came further into the space, not all the way, stopping near the reception desk and putting his hand on the counter in a gesture that wasn't quite touching and was something else she didn't have a precise category for. "The drainage issue," he said, "from last month. Resolved. The inspection? Cleared yesterday morning." She crossed her arms. "You could have asked me any of this in a phone call." "I could have," he agreed, "but you're here." "Yes." She looked at him. He looked back at her with that expression, the one without managed layers, the one that had appeared on the waterfront dock and in the penthouse kitchen, and that she'd become, over 3 months of intermittent contact, increasingly unable to pretend she didn't understand. He reached into his jacket pocket. She saw what it was before he said anything. The antique Carroway ring, gold, heavy, with the engraved interior she'd been close enough to read twice now. He held it in his palm, not extended toward her, not presented as an offering, just held. "The first time I put it on your finger," he said, "you didn't have a choice." He paused. "I had 3 seconds to make a decision, and I made the one that kept Russell from hurting you, and it was the right decision at the time, and it cost you things you didn't sign up to lose." She didn't say anything. "The second time," he paused. The word hung there for a moment, suggesting a future it hadn't been given yet. "There is no second time unless you choose it. That's what I'm here to tell you." He looked at the ring in his palm. "It's yours either way. You earned it. What you did in those 6 days, what you did on that dock, the ring belongs to you regardless of what you decide." She was quiet for a moment. She thought about her grandmother's inheritance and 4 years of building something from it. She thought about Russell's hand on her scrubs and the smoke rising over Ravenport. She thought about 2 nights of emergency sutures by herself and a terrifying man who had, beneath the terror, turned out to be someone who told the truth about what he was and asked nothing from her except what she was willing to give. She thought about the fact that she'd kept the ring in her bag for 3 months. "I'm not interested in a version of this where your world swallows mine," she said. "I know. This clinic stays exactly what it is. It serves everyone it serves. It has no connection to any part of what you run." "I know. And you're not an innocent man," she said. "And I'm not going to spend the next period of my life pretending that you are." "I know," he said. "I'm not asking you to." "You're asking me to know what you are and choose this anyway." He met her eyes. "Yes," he said. "That's what I'm asking." She uncrossed her arms. She reached out and took the ring from his palm. She held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it, the warmth from his hand still in the metal. She didn't put it on. Not yet. She looked at the rehabilitation space behind her, at the equipment and the room and the expanded footprint of the thing she'd built twice now, the second time better than the first. She looked at the wobbly third chair. She looked at Vincent Carroway standing inside a community medical clinic on the east side of Ravenport at 5:30 in the evening, alone and without an entourage, asking her for something he had no ability to take. "There are boxes of supplies in the back room," she said. "They need to go to the storage shelving. It's a 2-person job." He blinked. "That's a yes or a no depending on how the next 2 hours go," she said. "Start with the boxes." He looked at her for a moment. She watched something move through him. Not the managed professional response, not the organizational calculation. Something that was purely and completely him. He took off his jacket. He set it over the reception desk. He walked toward the back room. She stood in the waiting room and listened to him locate the boxes and begin moving them. And she looked at the ring in her hand and thought about the fact that this was the least romantic possible version of a significant moment, and that it was also, for exactly that reason, the one she would choose. She put the ring on. Then she went to help with the boxes. The months that followed were not without difficulty. That needed to be said clearly, the way all true things need to be said without decoration. The organizational restructuring Vincent had begun took longer than projected and involved conversations with people who were not interested in changing the terms of what they'd built and who made that lack of interest visible in ways that required response. There were weeks where he was inaccessible to her in the way that people are inaccessible when they're managing crises that don't have clean edges. There were weeks where she was inaccessible to him for the same reason from the other direction. They had arguments. Not about the fundamental things, those had been stated clearly and held, but about the daily texture of what it meant to exist in proximity to each other's lives. About time and priority and the specific friction that develops when 2 people who are each deeply capable and deeply accustomed to operating independently have to negotiate the space between them. Vincent was not easy to know. She'd understood that from the first morning she'd brought him coffee and watched him look at the cup like it was something he needed to remember how to receive. He had patterns of withdrawal that were not hostile but were complete, periods where he processed things alone because he'd spent so long alone that it was still the default position his system returned to under pressure. She learned to read those periods and not mistake them for distance. She was not easy to know either. She had a stubbornness that she'd described to herself for years as persistence, and that occasionally expressed itself as an unwillingness to accept help that made the people around her want to take the thing out of her hands. She had a clinical detachment that protected her at work and sometimes bled into her personal life in ways that flattened things she didn't mean to flatten. They learned each other the way adults learn each other, slowly, with setbacks, with the kind of imperfect progress that doesn't have a clean narrative arc but accumulates into something real. Pryor left the organization 8 months after the waterfront. He'd cooperated, as Claire had represented to him, and Vincent had honored that in the way he honored the things he committed to. Pryor moved to a city 3 hours from Ravenport and took a position with a mid-sized accounting firm, and as far as Claire knew, was managing nothing more complex than quarterly tax filings, and was significantly happier than he'd been in the previous several years. Reeves stayed. She'd been offered options and had evaluated them and had concluded that the version of the Carroway organization that was emerging was one she'd take her chances with. She and Claire developed a relationship that was not quite friendship and was not purely professional, something lateral and functional, built on mutual respect and the shared knowledge that they'd both been on a waterfront dock at a critical moment and had both held their positions. The third chair in the waiting room retained its wobble for 7 months. Claire eventually fixed it herself one evening when the clinic was closed, sitting on the waiting room floor with a screwdriver and the specific satisfaction of solving a small problem that had been present for a long time. She didn't tell anyone she'd done it. Nobody asked. One evening in the fall, close to a year after the Whitmore Community Trauma Center had opened, Vincent arrived at the clinic alone after closing time. He did this occasionally, arrived at the tail end of the day, in the window between the last patient leaving and Claire finishing her charting, and they'd walk to a restaurant nearby, or she'd make coffee in the staff kitchen, and they'd talk. This evening was different. She could see it in how he was carrying himself when he came through the door. Not a medical issue, not a crisis, but something that had weight. She was at the reception desk finishing notes. She looked up at him. He sat down in one of the waiting room chairs. Not the wobbly one. He sat forward with his elbows on his knees and his hands together and looked at the floor for a moment. She set down her pen and turned in the chair to face him. "Talk," she said. He looked up. "I had a conversation today with the 3 remaining captains who are still running operational sectors I told you I was going to wind down." He paused. "The conversation didn't go the way I needed it to go. Meaning 2 of them are willing to accept the transition on a modified timeline. Meaning 1 of them is not." He paused. "And the one who isn't is going to require a different kind of response than a conversation." She looked at him. "The nature of that response," she said carefully, "is it the kind that becomes a news story? Not if I manage it correctly. Is anyone going to get hurt?" He held her gaze. "Not in ways that weren't already in motion before I arrived." She sat with that. She'd learned in the months of knowing him what those careful phrasings meant and what they didn't mean, and where the lines were that he held and where the ones were that he'd adjusted. She didn't always like all of it. She'd told him that directly on 2 occasions, and he'd listened both times in the way that people listen when they're taking something in rather than waiting for you to finish. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he repeated. "That's not approval," she said. "I know. It's acknowledgement that I heard you, that you told me." She paused. "Thank you for telling me." He nodded slowly. She picked up her pen again and finished the note she'd been writing. She was aware of him sitting in the waiting room while she worked, and she was aware of how ordinary that felt, how completely and unremarkably ordinary it was to have him present in the space she'd built while she did the work of her day. She thought about what Russell had said on the waterfront. What exactly did you do for him? She thought about the answer to that question, which was fuller than the one she'd given in that room of captains, and which she'd never said out loud to Vincent directly. She'd saved his life. That was the literal answer. She'd kept him alive with what she had in the early hours of a morning when no one else was there. But the other part, the part she'd understood slowly over months, was that something in those 6 days of proximity, something in the specific friction of being seen by someone who neither feared him nor wanted anything from him, had been its own kind of intervention. Not medical, not romantic, just human. The basic and undervalued thing of having someone look at you plainly and respond to what they actually see. She capped her pen. She closed the chart. "Dinner," she said. He looked up from the floor. "The Italian place on Morrow Street has outdoor seating until October," she said. "And it's still September." He stood up. He straightened his jacket in that particular motion she recognized. He looked at her across the waiting room of the Whitmore Community Trauma Center, at the equipment and the doorways and the room she'd built twice and the chair whose wobble she'd finally fixed. and his expression held everything she'd learned to read in it, without drama or performance. "Let's go," he said. She turned off the lights in sequence the way she did every evening, the back rooms first, then the hallway, then the waiting room last. The sign on the exterior glass said Whitmore Community Trauma Center in plain block letters beneath the clinic hours, and below that, smaller, all patients welcome regardless of ability to pay. She locked the door. They walked to Morrow Street. The fall air had the particular clarity of early October, the kind that made the city look more defined against the sky than it did at any other time of year. The outdoor seating was still set up, a few other tables occupied, the neighborhood alive with the ordinary business of an evening. They sat across from each other in the unremarkable way of two people who had accumulated enough shared history that the moment didn't require narration. They ordered coffee. They talked about the drainage issue with the building on Calder Street that Pryor's old office was in, which had nothing to do with either of them, but which Claire had read about in the local paper and found unexpectedly funny. Vincent was not familiar with the story. She told him. He listened with the specific quality of attention she'd come to understand was not common in people and was one of the things she valued most specifically about him. The coffee arrived. The outdoor heater above the table came on automatically as the temperature dropped a degree. She looked at the ring on her hand in the particular orange light of the heater. The Carroway family ring, antique and slightly large and the most complicated piece of jewelry she'd ever worn. She looked at the man across from her. He had built something ugly and run it for 15 years and was in the slow and complicated and unfinished process of building something different. And he was not a simple person and not a safe choice and not a story that resolved cleanly into any category she'd learned to trust. And he had told her the truth about what he was and asked her to choose anyway. She had. That was the beginning. It was also, in all the ways that mattered, in all the ways that accumulate into the texture of an actual life, enough.